Alright, in this tutorial we're going to be looking in Photoshop and we're going to look at touching up a photograph, and we're going to look at some professional techniques, some simple techniques, some advanced techniques, a bunch of things to help us learn Photoshop and to learn how to touch up a photo properly. So I do have my photo ready. I'm just going to bring it in so we have a good understanding of what it's all about. A few different ways that I could open up a photo. So I have my photo here. I can click and drag it over top on a Mac, over top of Photoshop, and as I do that it opens up in a new tab, and there I'm ready to go. The other way I could also open is go to File, Open, and I could find that as well. Command O for a shortcut, and I can open that up. There is one thing I do want to mention here. You can open it up in a third way, which is interesting because I could show my picture here and I could actually click and drag it directly onto a canvas in Photoshop that's already open. So what I just did there, I just kind of put the picture already on an already open document, but it shows up as something a little bit different. It's a different layer. It's called a smart object, and smart objects are phenomenal. They're great, and we're going to learn about them a little bit later in another video as well. But right now I don't want that. I just want to open it up normally. So I'm actually going to delete this layer just by clicking on the trash, or I can click and drag it to the trash and now it's gone. So I just did want to show you that because that is an important thing to know too, that if you click and drag an image directly onto an already open document, it's going to open up as a smart object. So I have my image here. It's great, and the good thing about this image is that it's a recognizable person, Britney Spears. It is also a high quality image that is untouched, so we actually have that opportunity to touch it up ourselves and play around with it, enhancing the photo in many different ways. So right off the bat, when you get that image, what happens is you can see that there's a lock symbol here. So the image is locked right away because it's the only layer on this image. So what we could do is actually click on the lock once and it disappears, and now we could do whatever we want with this particular image. And remember, if I zoom in really close, I can see that this is made of tiny little pixels. So this is a raster image. It's pixelated. I'm in Photoshop, which is a raster program. So all these individual little squares, these little pixels, are really simple. It's just one color attached to a square. And as you zoom out, all those little pixels obviously make up a quality image here. Now, we're not actually going to do much with this image here. We're actually going to open up another document and bring this in. But what I do want to look at first is resolution. How do we look at resolution when we're looking at an image? Is this a good enough image to work with? Now, for this particular assignment, we're looking at making a magazine cover that is a roughly 8 by 10.875, and by having those dimensions ready to go and we know what we want to do, we will have an idea of what kind of image we want to put on there, like how big the image is physically, the pixel density, all that good stuff. So let's take a look at this particular image and go from there. Now, realistically, I'd love for you to use your own images, but this will give you an idea of what kind of quality, pixel density, physical dimension we're looking for in an image. So any image I ever bring into Photoshop, the first thing I can do is, number one, go to image size. And on the image size panel that shows up, I can see a few things. Number one, I could actually see my image at 100%. There it is, great. And then I could also look at the file size. So the image actual file size is about 60 megabytes. That's totally fine. The dimension, so this is like the pixel density. How many pixels actually make up this image? So it's about 3700 by 5600. Great, that's good. Now here's the issue here. The physical dimensions of this particular image, if I were to print it off right now, is 51 inches by 78. That's very large. That's huge. Much bigger than a magazine cover that I need that's roughly 8 by 10. So what I need to do, because I know this is for print, I need to change the resolution to 300 pixels per inch. Any image for the web or a digital display can be set at 72 pixels per inch. That's totally fine. But if I am going to print this raster image, or any raster image, going to put ink on paper, it needs to be 300 pixels per inch, and that's a great quality to have for print images. And make sure that when you do change it, it's not pixels per centimeter, it's pixels per inch. If you do pixels per centimeter, it's going to be much actually bigger, much more much more quality, higher quality, but in not really going to change how good the quality is versus 300 pixels per inch or 300 pixels per centimeter. 300 pixels per inch is perfect. It's just going to increase your file size and make it slower or harder to work with, quite frankly. So what I'm going to do is make sure I do not have resample on, do not click that on. And what's going to happen when I change this to 300 pixels per inch, my pixel density stays the same, but my physical dimensions change. So now this image is ready to be printed, which is great, 300 pixels per inch. And the physical dimensions are still really good for my magazine, 12 by 18. Remember, I need roughly an 8 by 10. Anytime you have a raster image that is small and you need to scale up proportionally, not a good idea. Anytime you have a raster image and it's too large for your space and you want to shrink it down, that's great. If you scale up proportionally a raster image, what happens is Photoshop has to interpolate the pixels and start to figure out how it's going to make the pixels work at a newer size, a larger size. And more often than not, it becomes pixelated and blurry. What we want to do is have a larger image and have to scale it down. That way it retains great quality and Photoshop doesn't have to figure out how to make extra pixels. It just starts to decrease the pixels that are currently there, keeping great quality at a smaller size. So hopefully that helps a little bit to understand resolution. Always look at this number. We never want these pixels or pixel density to change to go higher, because now you're just asking Photoshop to make more pixels, which we really don't want. If I were to resample this image and do that, I'm going to actually click this off and go to 72, back to 72 again. Sorry, didn't want to do that. And I resample now to make it 300. Now what happens is it increased the pixel density. I'm just forcing Photoshop to make up pixels, and what happens, it becomes pixelated, blurry. That's not what I want. So I'm not going to resample. I'm going to take that off and make sure I'm at 300, and that's what I want. But for this particular project, I'm just going to leave this alone. I'm going to cancel it, because what I want to do now, I'm going to create a new document. I'm going to bring this image in. It's actually going to make things a little bit easier. So let's start that off. I can go to File, New, or I could Command N, which I usually do. And my dialog box or my panel opens up for my new document. Normally, once again, I stay away from the presets. I just focus here on my custom panel. Number one, I want it to be in inches, because this is what this project is going to be, in inches. And it's going to be 8.25 by 11.125. All right, so it already is, the orientation is going to be portrait. We're not going to work with artboards. The resolution we do want to work with is 300. Once again, this is for print, and make sure it's pixels per inch, not per centimeter. Now here's a little tricky thing. Obviously, when we're working for print and looking to create a raster image that's going to be printed, we want to keep it CMYK. However, I'm going to explain in just a little bit, we want to keep this in RGB. And there's a reason why we keep it in RGB in Photoshop. We change it quickly later on when we're all done our project to CMYK and convert it back to RGB again. It's a really quick thing to do, but I'm going to explain why in just a few minutes. So we have our RGB color, 8.25 by 11.125. Now this Photoshop file is going to be slightly bigger than our 8 by 10.875 dimension that we're going to use in Illustrator. And the reason for that is bleeds. So the bleed area of the Illustrator artboard is going to obviously be slightly bigger than the 8 by 10.875 image area. So when we bring in our Photoshop or our raster TIFF to Illustrator, it's going to fill the bleed area, and we've already set that up, which is really great. So I'll explain that as we go throughout the video. So here we go. We're looking pretty good. We can check out advanced options, change out our backgrounds, but we're looking pretty good. I do want to see, we don't have to worry about color profiles or anything like that. We're just going to press create, and we're good to go. So here's the great thing about this. Anything I bring into this document, into this canvas, it's called. In Photoshop, they're called canvases. In InDesign, they're called pages. And in Illustrator, they're called artboards. So on this canvas, anything I bring in is automatically going to be 300 pixels per inch. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click on my image here of Brittany, and I'm just going to click and drag it onto my tab and then onto my new workspace in this document. So I'm going to click and drag. Don't let go of the click yet. Drag it over top of your workspace, your new canvas, and just drop it. And that's it. Another way to do that is now what you could do, you could also copy layers. So I'm just going to select the layer panel. And once again, if there's certain panels you don't have open, go to Window and open up any panel you want. As we go through this, I'll show you which panels we're going to be using. Layers panel is always open in Photoshop. It's so useful. I do half of my work in the layer panel and half of my work on the artboard. Layers panel is so diverse and so fantastic in Photoshop. We use it a lot. So my layers panel is open. If you want to open up a few other panels, I have a few other open here. My properties panel, my history panel will be used as well. And that's roughly about it for now. We are going to open up a few more later on as well. Okay, so I could also click on the layer, Command C or edit, copy, and I'm going to go onto my new document, Command V, and there it is once again. So just to show you, you are able to bring in any raster graphic, any raster image into any document in Photoshop by doing these few simple things. So I have two, I don't need two. I'm just going to throw one out just by clicking and dragging over the trash. I could also just click on it and press the trash, or I could have went to my drop down and just delete the layer. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to resize this image, right? It's not cropped well, and it's not great. And once again, the image you use might be different. It might be perfect when you drop it in. It's the size you want. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this image. I'm going to transform it. We've seen that in different programs. When you say you transform something, you scale it up, scale it down, change its position. So the way we do that here in Photoshop is edit, free transform, or Command T. Get to know that shortcut. Command T. And now what I'm able to do, a bounding box shows up around this layer, everything that's in that layer. And what I can do is obviously just scale it down. I grab it by the corners, scale it down. Now, Photoshop does things a little bit differently than other programs. You can actually change the settings if you want. Normally, when we scale something down, we hold down Shift to keep it proportional. We never want to squeeze or stretch images. We don't want to do that. So what I would normally do is hold down Shift. But the way Photoshop currently is, and I haven't changed the settings, that if I hold down Shift, that actually makes it able for me to squeeze or stretch it, which I don't want to do. So right now, the settings I have, I could just click and drag, and I don't hold Shift, I don't hold anything. I can hold Option, and that drags it from the center, from that point right here. But once again, I don't even have to do that really. I'm just going to make it work here for me, make it a little bit bigger here. I'm going to, because her arm was cut off there too, I'm going to try to fit her in really nicely, and you can do the same with your image any way you want. Okay. So I'm just going to make that look like there. Once again, it's a magazine cover, so keep in mind, you're probably going to have some type that's going to go over here, maybe some other pieces of information that are going to go as well, some little blurbs. But for now, this is looking good. To release the free transform, that's all I have to do is click somewhere else or just press enter. So I'm going to press enter because I'm used to doing that. And now it is set. It's ready to go. So what I could do from here is I can now name this layer, and I'm going to duplicate this layer. So number one thing we have to talk about are destructive methods and non-destructive methods in Photoshop. So to do something destructive is applying or changing up pixels directly to the actual layer. So this, I would actually change these pixels and not be able to go back and edit it once I saved it and closed it again. That's a destructive method. A non-destructive method is using smart objects, duplicating layers, and making edits that I can later save, come back to and open it up later, a month later, weeks later, years later, and still come back and edit the image however I want. So it's a non-destructive way. And we're going to do plenty of non-destructive methods here with this, so we could always come back later on and fix things up and do whatever we want. We're not going to destroy actual pixels. We're going to make new layers and play around like that. Okay, so what I could do, there's a number of ways to duplicate the layer. But what I'm going to do first, I'm going to just call this my original layer, because what I'm going to be able to do with this is go back and forth and kind of show my before and after. Am I happy with it? Am I not? Do I need to change something? Do I not? So I called it original just by double clicking on the area here and typing in original. Now what I can do is duplicate this layer. I'm going to show you a number of ways to do that. So number one way to duplicate a layer, I could just click and drag it over the top of the plus sign at the bottom of my layer panel, and it's duplicated. Cool. Command Z, I'm going to undo that. I could also just click on this layer and go to my hamburger menu here and just say duplicate layer. Layer is duplicated. I can name it, change it up, whatever I want to do. Okay, there it is. Command Z, getting rid of that. A keyboard shortcut to create or duplicate a layer, Command J. So I could do that. Command J, great. And one last option to do is I could, just like in other programs, when you want to duplicate something, you click on it, hold down Option or Alt on a PC, and you just click and drag. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to hold down Option, click and drag, look at my cursor. It turns into a double cursor. A little blue line shows up about where I'm going to put it, at the top or the bottom. I'm going to put it at the top, and now I've duplicated it again. So many different ways to duplicate a layer, but it's always handy to know how to do that. You're going to find one you're going to be more comfortable with, but normally Command J or holding down Option and dragging is my preferred choice. So I've made a new layer, and I'm going to call this one Working, because this is the one I'm going to be working on. You can name it something else too in terms of what your next step will be, but currently my next step is going to be my camera raw. So I'm just going to leave it as Working right now, and actually I could shut these off. I don't need them. But I'm going to do a little work with Camera Raw right now. It's a great filter that we use, and it's just going to slowly change some subtle effects on the current image. Once again, mine is going to be different than yours depending on what image you're using. Yours could be a very warm image and you need to cool it down. Yours could be a very cool image, you need to warm it up. Whatever the case is, we're going to take a look at that. So I have my working file layer selected. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go up to Filter, and I'm going to click on Camera Raw Filter. What's going to open up here is a new panel, and it's going to have my picture in there, and it's going to show me what's going on. This is my current image, which is great. And what I want to do too, there seems a lot going on here, but we're just going to do some basic work here. Very, very simple stuff. We're not going to go overboard. We're just going to keep it simple. What I want to do first off, if I look around, is okay, I could do all this editing on the right hand side. This is my current image. Great. I could Command minus to zoom out. I could Command plus to zoom in. And that is obviously Control plus or Control minus on a PC. I can, once I get close, I can use my space bar on my keyboard to move it around and use the hand tool. Okay, so we could do that too. So I'm going to focus on right here. The one thing I love about this Camera Raw are all the editing features, obviously, but all this before and after. So if I clicked on that little image down there before, I could actually set up different ways to see before and after. So if I just wanted to look at it this way, it obviously shows me before and after. That's great. And I could see, obviously, cycle through. There's a before and after, and top and bottom, however I want to do it. But the one that I prefer is just side by side and see how we do there. Okay, so I have that. What I want to do is I have my histogram here. It shows me what's going on in terms of my colors and my contrasts and all this going on, my darks and lights. But there's all these options up here to look at, but really the only one I want to look at is editing here in this case. Spot removal, there's far more control in the actual Photoshop program, not in this particular filter. Actually using adjustment brush is where you could actually brush an area and only that area is affected. Same with the gradient. I can click out and drag a gradient area and only that area is affected. Same with the radial filter. I could grab out a radial area and only that area is affected. Red eye removal, which is a very uncommon thing now, but it's something that you could play around with as well. The presets I'm going to look at as well, really, really cool, but we're not too worried about that right now because we're going to make our own changes and our own customization to what we want to do here, okay? So I'm on the main edit, and what I want to do, I'm just going to look at, I could make auto. If I clicked on auto, it would show me some automatic changes, and I have my before and after, but I don't really want to do that. So Command Z, I undid. I just kind of want to give you an idea. We're going to work with the color, not just monochromatic or black and white, and let's just get started and see what happens here, okay? So very basic, very simple, how to use Camera Raw. So what I like to do is give myself an idea of where I want to be with my temperature. Okay, is it cool? Is it warm? So sometimes I go to extremes just to see what it does. And if I'm not happy with that, the one thing I could do is actually just double click on your arrow here, your slider, just double click on it and it brings it back to 0. It brings it back to its original position where you can see all of these are 0. So if I want to warm it up a bit, that's fine, I can, but I could also do this later on with adjustment layers, which we're going to focus on quite a bit on this one. If I make it too cold, so once again, I was kind of happy with where it was, that's fine. If I want to move it up a little bit, I can, that's great. Tint, if I want to bring, oh, that's a little too much, that's a little too much there. Once again, I was happy with where it was. Double click or just type in 0. Exposure, was it overexposed, underexposed? Do I need to work with that? Whatever the case is. This one was fine the way it was, especially if this comes from a professional photographer. More than likely, it's exposed properly. A lot of the contrast and any of these issues you have, they're not there. It's actually a really well done photo. But we are going to enhance some things as we go. Contrast. Do I want to work with the contrast? And once again, if I go really high, really low at both ends, where am I looking? You know what I mean? So we're going to play around with that and see where we are. But once again, I have my before, I have my after. Now I'm starting to see what's kind of happening here. And once again, I could click on this little eye icon, and just if I hold it down, it shows me the before and after here as well, which kind of gives me another way to see what I need to see here. Okay. So once again, highlights, I can play around, shadows, you know, where do I want to be with my shadows, darks, or do I want to bring out some more textures in those darks? The whites. Once again, we're just playing around and seeing where I want to be with some of these colors and some of these bars. I'm just going to scroll down and keep going, how much texture I want to show. The clarity. You start to see what each one individually does and how extreme you can go. And maybe there's a certain look you're going for. Maybe you are not trying to get this perfect look. You're actually trying to create something a little bit different, which is totally fine. That's a great way, and here's a great way to play around with that. So the vibrance and the saturation, how much of that color we're going to bring in. Okay, let's even pretend we're pretty happy with that. Turn it on and off. So yeah, that adds some warmth and some clarity there. Great. I'm going to click off my basic. My curve. Now the curves panel, the curves bar here, the block, is very interesting because you can do so much with it, and it also applies in Photoshop as its own adjustment layer here. But I actually really enjoy the way it does and works in Camera Raw. Is you could play around with it a few different ways. So there is this option here to use the parametric curve, which I'm not a huge fan of because it allows you to click and drag like the normal curves panel would, and I really can control it here as well, which is really, really cool. Once I place an image, once I place a dot and start dragging it up and down, I could really start to see different things I could do with that. But I'm not a huge fan of playing with this version, but I do like this version here that is I'm more familiar with, and it's the point curve. So I can click and drag, and I can move it around in real time and see what changes I'm going to make. If I go here, this is what happens. If I go up, so we're going from light to dark, but we could play around and start to see what kind of lights and darks I want to bring in. And we could always click and drag other points and add in, once again, more light, more dark. Now, if I'm not happy with this, what I could do, that circle that I made, that little point, I could just double click on it, it goes away. Double click on it, it goes away. And now this is the overall red, green, and blue colors we're working with. But if I want to specifically work with just the specific red, green, or blue channel, I can do that. Click on the red channel. Do I want to bring up more reds, more magenta-ish, more greens? And once again, if I'm not happy with it, double click on that circle, it goes away. But it's always nice just to play around a bit. Do I want to warm it up? Do I want to... If an image has too much magenta, well, I need to take out that magenta, so let me move the bar this way. So there's all these great options to work with, but I just want you to see what you're able to do. And once I do make that little visibility comes up, I could turn it on and off just to see, you know, where am I at with it. But once again, not really going to touch the curve panel, but there's so much you could do with it. Then we get into details. So if we actually click on this drop down arrow, it gives me even more options if I start to play around with sharpening, and sharpening obviously bringing out really, really strong details in there. And then once I bring it up a little bit, now I can play around with the radius and the detail and the masking. There's a lot going on there. Same with noise reduction. If I want to get rid of noise, make it really get rid of that grain, get rid of any issues there. And once again, I could have more options here. Color noise reduction, so the noise that comes with the color, I could do the same thing there. And once again, if anything actually happened, which a lot of these you do have to understand, they're very, very subtle. You might not be able to tell something even changed, but it is ideal to do subtle changes and then see how it works with you from there. Now, the color mixer is great. I love it. Once again, I do like to do this also in Photoshop with adjustment layers, which we're going to talk about later. But I do want you to understand there's a couple different ways you could do it. You could do the hue, saturation, luminance. It's actually, they're both the same, but it's just how the layout is. So with my hue, I could change up my reds, okay? Not much happening there. Certain channels will be stronger than others, that's for sure, depending on your picture. And those are all the different hues I can play with. Then I can play with the different saturations of some of these. Then I can play around the different luminance of some of these ones as well. Okay. But the other one now, I said, you know what? I'm going to work with all of them. There's a lot in terms of layout there. But what Photoshop allows me to do is see things, layout, the customization that I want to see. So now instead of doing it that way, I could actually click on each individual color that they've laid out for me. Here's my reds, and I can play with that. It's the exact same as doing it this way, just a different layout. Okay, so you could actually really control all the different colors you have there. Color grading. So once again, color grading, talking about looking at everything or specifically looking at shadows, midtones, and highlights. Now, once again, if you could play around with this, now just looking at my midtones and playing around with midtones and just shadows and highlights. It's very intricate. It's very detailed. It's amazing, quite frankly. The optics. So if there's distortion on your camera when the picture was taken, you might be able to fix those things here. A vignette. If there was a vignette on there, you want to fix that, you could do that as well. Geometry. So once again, if there were issues how you want to move this thing around, which is once again not a great idea, but if there is corrections to make, you can make them here as well, or once you get inside Photoshop as well. Once you actually, I should say finish this with this filter. The grain, if you want to add some grain, and once again, you can get very specific with a lot of these things, but normally you might not want to go too far. And then calibration, you can play around with different calibrations as well. The last thing I want to show you here in Camera Raw was the presets. So there are some really cool presets. You click on them, you take a look, and you just kind of scroll through and see, wow, you know, actually I kind of like some of these presets. I like what they're doing to the image. They're kind of like filters, you know, on a, you know, we have these Snapchat and Instagram, you have these interesting filters that you can use. That's kind of what they are. They're preset filters that you might actually really enjoy and try out. Some of them are really push that contrast. Some of them are very subtle. You could play around with whatever you want, but check out the presets. Pretty cool stuff that you could play around with. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that. I have my before and after, looking pretty good. You know, didn't want to make too many changes here, but you can do so much with the Camera Raw filter. So once I'm happy with everything, what I can do, and because I made a separate layer, all those changes, I'm going to press OK. It says commit changes. I'm going to press OK. Now I'm done, and it's going to save what I've done. And once again, I have my Camera Raw filter layer that I did all the work there. So if I shut this off and take a look at my original, now I see what I did. I brightened it up a little bit, made it a little bit warmer, little subtle changes. But I'm also going to later on use some of these adjustment layers to do the same thing, okay? And you could always go back to Camera Raw and fix things up once you're kind of close to finished or whatever. There's actually a couple different options, but I do want you to see how your adjustment layers work. Now, remember when I said we need to work in RGB and not in CMYK? Well, there's a reason for that. And the reason is, in RGB mode in Photoshop, which we could change here, image mode, we can see all our color modes: grayscale, duotone, index, color, RGB, CMYK, all these great things here. If I keep it in RGB, I have access to everything Photoshop has to offer. Take a look at filters. I can use any one of these, my adjustment layers. I can use any one of these. Watch what happens when I convert to CMYK. If I go to CMYK, it says, do you want to change the CMYK? I do not want to merge anything. Great. Now what happens is this. If I go to filter, now there's some things that are grayed out. CMYK version does not allow for some of these things to work. If I go to my adjustment layers, there are some things that are grayed out. I cannot use. I do not have access to because I'm in CMYK mode. So what I need to do is stay in RGB while I'm working in Photoshop. Then, when I'm ready to make my final TIFF that's going to be imported into InDesign or Illustrator, I can then convert to CMYK. Then what I can do is convert back to RGB and save my PSD as an RGB. That's what I want to do, okay? So it's in CMYK right now, and it shows me right here in the name. So what I can do, because I made a quick switch, I can Command Z, just undo it, edit, undo. I can go to my history panel and go back one step, so it's not CMYK. Now, the thing I can do also just go back to RGB, but if there were some changes made and I can't just go back to RGB because something might happen there, I'm just going to do one of those. But in this situation, it's just one step back. Now I'm back to RGB, and that's where I want to be, okay? So that's how you change your color mode, but we're going to do that later on. Now, the next thing I want to do is I'm going to play around with something called Liquify. It's another filter. It's very interesting to play around with. Gives you tons and tons of great control, especially on a portrait, especially on a face. And we're going to play around with that right now. So what I'm going to do again, I'm going to duplicate this layer, because maybe this one I should call my camera raw layer, okay? And now I know that that's what I did. So with this layer, which I'm still happy with, it looks great. I'm going to duplicate this layer, Command J or Control J on a PC. And this one I'm going to call Liquify. Okay, there's my Liquify layer. Great. Now what I could do with these, I could shut these off. I don't really need them. I don't really need this background layer either. I'm just going to keep it for now, but I don't really need it either. So once again, it's got the lock on it. Can't do too much to it. Once you click off the lock, I could play around with it much more. So Liquify. Let's go up to our filter and go to Liquify. It's going to open up another panel, once again, just like it did for the camera raw filter. And here I have so many things that I can do, but I'm going to really quickly simplify and clean it up a little bit for us so we don't get too overwhelmed. Okay, number one, let's look at the left-hand side. These are our manual options to work in Liquify. Liquify allows us to change up all these little pixels all at once. It allows you to move, a group of pixels very quickly. But because Photoshop uses this AI, this artificial intelligence called Sensei, and what it does, it recognizes areas for us that automatically can be quickly edited for us. So I'm going to show you the manual tools first, and then I'm going to show you the kind of AI tools, if you will. So number one, we have a few forward warp tool. We have a bunch of tools here, reconstruct, smooth, twirl, all these great things. But the first thing I want to do, let's pretend I want to play around with the model's face, the portrait's face. It doesn't matter. I'm going to freeze some areas. So that means when I freeze an area, I'm going to click and drag, and I'm just going to paint on an area that I do not want to touch. So let's say I want to play around with the face, but I do not want the hair to move at all. I'm just clicking and dragging and painting in the hair because I don't want the hair to move. Now, once again, my brush is a certain size right now. If I want my brush to be bigger or smaller, you could actually go up to your brush tool options and you could change the size of it here so it gets a little bit bigger. The way that I like to do it is using my keyboard shortcuts. By using the bracket close button, I make it bigger. The bracket open, the open bracket button, it makes it smaller. So I could do that and it really, really helps out. The other way, obviously the density, the rate, the pressure, especially if you're using a stylus, that really helps out too. But that's all I need is that. And if I want to zoom in, once again, I could zoom in, make it a little bit easier, Command plus, and I zoom in, press down my space bar, and I make the hand tool. Now, once again, those tools are here, but using keyboard shortcuts, so much better. Oh, my brush is a little too big. I'm going to use the open bracket and I'm going to make it smaller. And there we go. Okay. So I'm just freezing these areas so they cannot move. Now what I can do is I can use my forward warp tool and I can start playing around with certain areas I want to change. I don't want to say I want to fix anything. There's nothing really wrong with this image, obviously, but there are some things I can play around with. So if I make my brush a little bit bigger using the close bracket, I'm just going to start clicking and dragging. And look what I'm doing. I'm clicking and dragging large amounts of pixels and just kind of reshaping them. I'm transforming them, bringing them in. Maybe here I'm playing around with the jawline, making it a little bit tighter, making it smaller. Maybe I'm going to make it a little bit bigger brush, and I'm going to bring in the chin. Let's just say I'm going to bring in the chin for some whatever reason. I'm going to bring it up a little bit, even over here I'm going to make it a little bit more symmetrical, let's say. Same with the nose. Let's pretend the bridge of the nose here, I'm going to bring it in a little bit for whatever reason. On your image you can do whatever you want. The very important trick here is subtlety. You don't want to play around with too much and change up the person drastically. The idea behind this is to subtly change whatever you want to change. As a photo touch-upper, whatever, you wanted to fix something, that's fine. But don't go overboard and now that person's unrecognizable. It doesn't look like them anymore. Going too far is too much. We don't want to do that. Okay, so there are other options here we could play around with. Reconstruct will bring those things back. When I click back on them, it'll bring it back to its original form when I came in with this image. Smoothing. So these ideas of twirling, I could twirl, which I don't really, I never really see myself doing this, but there are, once again, I could reconstruct that and bring that back to normal. There are areas, if you do it subtly, maybe you might find something helpful there. Pucker is kind of that idea. When we pucker, we kind of like sucking on a lemon, we suck things in. Once again, I could just reconstruct that, get that back to normal. And same with bloat. So pucker and bloat are very common things, where now this is going to blow something up. So I could blow the eye up, which normally I wouldn't do. Command Z also works here when you undo something. Push left tool, you can play around with a lot of these different tools. I'm just wanted to show you some ideas here. And obviously the thaw mask, obviously the opposite of freeze would be to unfreeze something, or like it says, to thaw something. But we did freeze that. That way, when we did play around with this, you know, I'd play around this idea here. Sorry, this one. If I move too far, well, once again, the hair doesn't move because it was frozen, okay? So when I click and drag, you know, it doesn't change anything here because this area is frozen. It's not editable. Now, these are the manual tools. Let's take a look at the facial aware features that Photoshop recognizes. So let's look at the eyes. So what I'm going to do first, I want to link all these because I want both eyes to work together, because once again, this particular portrait, person's looking straight at the camera, so there's not going to be really three-quarter view or anything that I need to fix up. So I'm just going to look at the eye size. Let's play around with it and see what happens. All right, changing the eye size. Now, once again, subtlety. Yes, it could look very silly if we do something like this, but Photoshop recognizes eyes and nose and mouth and the jawline and all this stuff. It's really, really cool. So we could play around with some subtle ways with your image and really play with the eyes and do things like this, okay? And the distance and whatever. If you want to fix up whatever you want to fix up. The nose, let's take a look at the nose. Height and the nose width, okay? And once again, you could do all of this manually, but Photoshop gives us this idea that we can do it with using AI, where it already recognizes it. I could play around with the smile. Now, you do have to understand some things you play with are very unnatural. So if you want to force a smile, maybe not a great idea, right? So we got to play around with that upper lip and lower lip. A lot of different options here we could play around with, okay? So once again, change them, but I'm talking subtle changes, because when we go back and we're done, let me zoom out here, Command minus, zoom out. When we're done, you're going to see the before and after. You're like, that was a little overboard. I did a little too much. I made the eyes too large, or I made the face too slim, whatever the case was, and hopefully go back and fix those things up. So I'm just going to say, you know what? I'm happy with this. It looks pretty good. Don't worry about the red. It doesn't show up. It was just there to freeze it. In the meantime, I'm going to press OK. And there I am. So now what I could do, once again, I'll click on my original layer and make sure it's visible, and I could just shut the visibility of the layer on and off of the top one and see what kind of changes I made. I can zoom in, Command plus, and just to see what happened here. Okay, it's like, okay, it's still recognizable. Maybe I went a little too far with some things, maybe not, but once again, it still looks like this original person, but some changes were made. Okay, so there I go from there, and now I can kind of play around with that. But with Liquify, you can also play around with not just a face. You could obviously play around if I wanted to shrink up the arms, or actually, quite frankly, make them bigger, the waist, quite frankly, the neck, anything you want to shrink up, you can. A large amount of pixels, bring in, brush them in, or brush them out. So there's quite a bit you could do there that would really help out. Now, let's get to one other panel here that we like to use, which is the history panel. So the history panel, pretty awesome panel to use, because it's kind of like our list of undos and redos. It has everything we need to look back and be like, what did I just do last? So Liquify was the last thing I did. It's like, you know what? Historically, looking at the very first thing I did, which was open up the file, which was nothing there, new document, like everything is gone. Well, it's not gone as long as you don't make any changes now. And you can start to see all the things you did. You did the free transform, brought it in. You changed the layer name, you duplicated layers, you played around with camera raw, which is right here. So all these things get recorded. Now you could actually add even more steps, or kind of leave it at default, because after a while these will start to go away and you can only go back to the opening of this document. So right now I'm at Liquify, and that's totally fine. And the other thing I could do now is say at this moment, you can almost like create chapters for yourself. You can actually create a new snapshot. So here's my new snapshot. And you know what? At this time was when I liquefied everything. So I'm going to call it Liquify. And now at any point in time, I can go back in time when I was working on this edit and just go to the liquify part of this, my stage, or should I say chapter. So there's some great snapshots you could make and continue to do that. You can clear the history, which is not a great idea. The only issue I would say, be careful. If I do go back to Camera Raw, but I love my Liquify filters, the second I go back to a step and I start playing around, all these steps will disappear. They will no longer exist. So you do need to be careful when you're playing with the history panel, is not to go too far back and start playing around at a circle or something like that, because these things will disappear. So just be careful there. So make sure you're on your last step and you continue from there. And once again, you can make that new snapshot from there as well. Okay. So the history panel, very, very useful, but just be careful how you use it. If you want to take many steps back, you can go back. Instead of doing undo, 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 you can go back and be like, you know, I want to be about here because I don't like the changes I made so far. So the history panel, very, very useful. All right, the next thing here we're going to look at is actually adding some highlights and lowlights, so shadows as well. And the way we do that is it's actually called dodging and burning. And dodging, the tools are actually here, but we're gonna do it in a slightly different way. We have a dodge tool, which actually brightens, and a burn tool that makes things darker. Now, I'm gonna show you that a little bit later, but what I wanna do first is create a new layer. I'm not gonna duplicate the layer this time. I'm just gonna create a new layer, a blank layer. I could do it right here, new layer, or just click plus sign, new layer. It's blank, there's nothing on it. But what I'm gonna do is add brushwork and make areas that are lighter and darker, play around with the opacity and blending modes and see how it looks. But first, when I do that, I'm going to click on the brush tool. Now the brush tool has a lot of options, and already you can see the brushwork there. And what I can do now is play around with it. The one way we look up here is anytime I click on a tool, the control panel will show me more options for that tool. If I click on this tool, it shows me that. Click on this tool, it shows me that. Click on eyedropper, shows me that. So I'm on my brush tool. I can go down here and take a look at different options I have for my brush. I have the size of my brush, which once again, we can control with our keyboard, open and close bracket. And the hardness, once again, we can also see what a hard brush does with hard edges or a soft brush does. So if I bring this all the way down, it's more like a soft brush. Bring it all the way up, it has hard edges. So I like to have soft brushes. Here as well, if you wanted to, you could actually change the roundness of your brush. So if you're using a calligraphic brush and you want it to be like that, you could also change the direction of how that brush is gonna go. In this situation, we just want it to be simple like that, a full round brush. What I'm also going to click on here is I'm going to make sure that my foreground color is white. So that's all I did was double click here, or click on it once actually, go to white, and I'm good. So now what I can do on this open layer, there's nothing on that layer. I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to bring out some of just the highlighted areas that I want to enhance. I want to make them pop even a little bit more. And it's going to look a little off because I am going to go, I'll go with a 75% opacity, decent sized brush, and I'm just going to start painting. And this might look a little odd, but that's all I'm doing is bringing out some nice highlighted areas I really want to accentuate. I'm going to bring down my brush work if I need to. Bring down my, the size of my brush to play around a little bit more. Maybe I'll give it a quick little splash there on the cheeks. Maybe I'll zoom out, Command minus or Control minus on a PC, and just bring out some of the highlighted areas. Maybe I want some more highlights in a certain area. All right. So there we go. Now, like I said, it looks off 100%. I totally get that. But if you look at this right now, without anything, you'll see just the brushwork on this layer. So this is a non-destructive method. Imagine if I actually painted directly on this layer. All right, I paint on the layer. Now it's on the layer. I can't go back. If I save this, close it, and open it back up again, I can't fix that. That's gonna be very difficult to fix. So what I do instead is I make a new layer and put those paint brushes or whatever on that layer. That way I can go back and edit these anytime. So you know what? I'm really not happy with that, how bright that one is on the lip. So what I can do, I could just go back in, maybe even with the eraser tool, and get a similar brush. Make sure it's soft. And I can make sure I'm on this layer. Don't delete anything from that layer. bring down the opacity 50%, let's say, and I could start to erase a little bit there. Oh, okay, great. And I'm not affecting the pixels directly. I'm only affecting the brushwork I did, okay? So now what I want to do, I want to start playing with the blending mode of just this layer. So let's call this layer highlight, because this is my highlight layer. And I'm going to change it to soft light. There are a ton of different blending layers you can look at, blending modes. And you can even scroll through them to see which one you think works best. And they should have just a subtle hint of the highlight coming up. So the one I'm going to choose is soft light. And you can see right away, it kind of softens it, it blends it into the layer below it very, very nicely. And if I still feel it's too much, I could play with the opacity. I could bring that down a little bit. And the way I like to play with opacity, if you hover over the name, you can just scroll left and right, click and drag, scroll left and right, and I'll bring it down incrementally. But the way or you could click on the arrow and drop it, or you can click on here and type in a specific number. The way I like to do is select the number and just hold down shift and increments of 10 and use my arrow tool to bring it down. So that's obviously nothing. But I bring it back up subtly, I can start to bring out some of those colors. Or sorry, not the colors. I bring up some of those highlights. And I feel theirs pretty good, 80%. And what I can do, I can turn it on and off to see what kind of feel what I get from it. Once again, if I'm not happy with it, I could erase some things, I could mask it and mask some things out. But for the most part, I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make a new layer again, but this time I'm going to call it shadows. And I'm going to now paint and make shadows. So here I go with my brush again, but this time I'm going to paint on black. Okay, so there's my black, there's my brush, and I'm going to start painting as well. So this time I'm going to hit up the areas I want to make a little bit darker. Once again, it's very dark. I could zoom in, get really controlled. I could change up the opacity of my brush, but right now I just want to kind of do it kind of somewhat quickly. But like I said, I could really control these areas if I wanted to. Okay. So just ideally, if I wanted to, I could. I'm just, like I said, just playing around here a little bit. Obviously, I would want to fix some of these areas up, but I'm going pretty quick. Same idea. I'm going to change the blending mode up to soft light. We see it's a subtle now change, bringing it in. I did go dark in some areas. That's okay. I'm going to change up the opacity, bring it down. Okay, still bringing in some of that contour, still really shaping things, all right? And once again, I turn it on and off. If it's too much, I could change it. I could erase some of the areas, or I could go back in and paint some more. It's its own special layer, and I'm good to go there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click on both of these together. I click on one, hold down Command, click on another. And I'm going to Command G. I can group these layers. I could actually create a new group from layers, which is what I'm doing right now. So I could do that, or I could just Command G. And this one I'm going to call, I'll just, for simplicity's sake, H&S, which is highlights and shadows. And there we go. If you want to name it properly, because you're going to hand it off to somebody, it would be ideal to call it highlights and shadows. But for me, and I know exactly what you're going to do, so that's ideal. I definitely want this added to any image you use, whether it's your own or you're going to use this particular image. I definitely want to see some highlights and shadows. And once again, I could just, now that they're grouped together, I can shut them off together at the same time and see kind of what it did to help with the image, if it helped at all. Some of these aren't working as well, which is okay. That's all right. I could always go back and edit it because it's non-destructive. Okay. So now my highlights and shadows are done. And once again, if I am in my history panel, I see all the brush work I did, the eraser work I did. I can go back and change things. I can make a new snapshot and say, yeah, this was for the highlights and shadows, the HS. And I could always go back. So you know what? I remember what Liquify looked like. Oh, so I can go back to just my Liquify portion. And remember, now it's gone. All that other stuff is gone. If I start to make changes, if I click one brushwork, all this is going to be gone. So no, I'm going to say, no, this is where I am. The highlights and shadows I really liked, and I'm good to go there. Okay. So now what I can do, I did want to show you that idea of dodging and burning, but the idea of dodging and burning, I'm just going to shut this off for now, is I'm going to duplicate my Liquify layer. I have to directly edit pixels, which I'm not a fan of. That's a destructive way to do it. But it is one way to work with dodging and burning, because the tool is here and it's a great tool to use, but I still prefer this method just because it allows me more control with the brushwork. I could go back and mask it and erase it. With this, I need to directly edit the pixels on this layer. So I'm going to click my dodge tool. Once again, I'm just going to start off nice and easy, 25%, and I'm just going to subtly bring up some of these lights and see if anything actually changes. Let me give it a little bit more just so you can see it. Work a little bit faster. All right. It's actually, once again, you're playing with the exposure, and what actually happens is it gets actually a little bit more gray than bringing out lights. It gets a little lighter gray, which I'm not a huge fan of. But I wonder if playing with this will help change it up, but not really. And then I'm also going to do a burn tool. The burn actually makes things darker. Now, when you think things get darker, they get really dark. If you go too much, or if your opacity is too high. So you're just kind of accentuating, you're just accenting certain areas that are already dark, and you're just kind of making them a little bit better. But once again, we're going to shut this on and off and see what it did compared to Liquify. So I made some areas lighter, some areas darker. And it does it in a very smooth, clean way. But once again, I still prefer adding in my own brushwork, and I can change it anytime I want. But I did want to show you dodge and burn just to give you a general idea of what it's all about. But for now, I'm going to throw that away. I don't need it. And I'm going to have these two ready to go. The next thing we're going to want to do is look at frequency separation. Frequency separation is where we separate the tone of the skin and the texture of the skin. This helps us to later on clear up the skin, make it smoother, make it cleaner, and then obviously play with the textures and get rid of all these like little blemishes here that we want to get rid of as well. So we're going to do that. Now there's specific steps to this, and this is a little bit more of an advanced feature. So what I'm going to do here, first off, is I'm going to take these two now. Actually, no, I could just take Liquify, this new one, and I'm just going to duplicate it. So Command J, but I'm going to duplicate it twice. Command J again. I'm going to shut off my current Liquify one, and I'm going to name these very specifically. Now, naming, like I said, in general, organizing is very important, but for this specific step, we definitely need to name these properly. The bottom one is going to be called Skin, because those are going to be the skin tones that we're going to play with. The top one is going to be called Textures. So first, I want to work with the skin. So I'm actually going to group these together just so I know that they're a part of the frequency separation. And so I'm just going to select both. I press Command and hold down both, and Command G. Or I could just say New Group from Layers, and I would make a new group. I'm going to double click on that name, and I'm just going to call it FS for frequency separation. So I'm going to open that up. I'm going to click on the skin layer. So the skin layer, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into Filter and Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to set that to 7 pixels. And what it does, it just kind of blurs it enough where some of these tones just start coming together, and that's kind of it. I don't lose too much detail, I don't have too much detail, which is totally fine. Now this part is going to be a little weird, but that's okay. What I want to do, I'm going to click on the texture layer now, and this is what I'm going to do to the texture layer. I'm going to go to Image and Apply Image. What I'm going to do here first is go to my layer, and it's going to be called the skin layer. So this is going to apply to the skin layer. So even though we're on the texture layer, it's going to affect the skin layer. So these two are working together. Great. The channel's RGB, and I'm going to look at inverting it, which is going to look weird, but that's okay. And plus my highlights and shadows are on too, which will also make it look a little odd, but that's okay. Then I'm going to make sure that my blending mode is add, my opacity is 100%, and my scale is 2. So skin, invert, 100%, 2, and your blending mode is add, and say okay. Now, what I'm going to do, it kind of looks odd right now, but what I'm going to do to fix it up, to finalize it, I'm going to change my blending mode for the texture layer to linear light. And now it's going to come back to kind of normal looking again. So now what I've done, I've separated my skin tones and the skin texture, which I could always go back in, which I'm going to show you later, on how to touch up some of those blemishes later, okay? So this is where we're at right now. So we have this all together. Now I've set up the frequency separation. Now what I need to do is work with it, apply it, actually do something with it. And the idea behind this frequency separation is playing with the tones separate from the textures. So I'm going to click on the skin layer. And on the skin layer, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start selecting areas. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to select areas where there's a light and a dark, where there's a high separation, even though it's lit, there's a high separation of a harder value and a lighter value, a darker value and a lighter value. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. On the skin layer, I'm going to select the lasso tool. So the lasso tool is in here, and you might have another one shown. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my feather, because remember the control panel allows you to, the tool that you're on will change the control panel. So right now I need my feather to be 25 pixels. And what's going to happen is once I select that area and I let it go, it's going to blend in a little bit better. If the feather's not there, it's going to be a hard edge, and we don't want that. So what I'm going to do first, just to show, I'm going to select an area between some like light and dark areas. It could be a fairly generous area, or it could be tighter. You can zoom in and get a little tighter. So now that area is selected, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go up to filter and blur and Gaussian blur again. But this time what I'm going to do, I'm going to inch up my radius, and I'm going to start to see how this blends in a little bit better together. Because right now, if I look at nothing, it's just, you know, a light and a dark area. If I start to bring it up, I remember I kind of went up to like about 30, and you start to see they blend a lot better together. So let's get to 30 and look at that. Now, once again, your picture and your changes, your tonal value will probably be different than this particular picture. So we'll say, okay. So now I let go of that. Command D or Control D on a PC will get rid of that. And I'm just going to keep working with it. I'm going to find these large areas, and I'm going to go to filter and blur and Gaussian blur. And there it is again. And once again, if I go too high, it's going to turn gray. It's going to be a real ugly mess, but I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for a subtle tonal grade that is not too contrasty there. Once again, I'm going to go to the filter, and instead of going to blur, Gaussian blur, and doing it again, because they're very similar, I could actually just go to Gaussian blur here. It's the last thing I just did in the filter panel. And there's also a keyboard shortcut as well. So I'm going to click on that. Good. I'm going to find an area over here. And once again, I'm going to go, now on a Mac, it's Control Command F, and I see it comes together. So this is going to make it much faster. I could also drag that one out and use it again, or I can make a new one. Control Command F, or once again, just go up to filter and Gaussian blur, or go and do it all over again if I want to get change it up a little bit. Okay, so you're going to keep doing this. I'm going to go a little bit faster just to show what its capabilities and also some of the issues you might come across. So what it's doing is just evening out the tones in the skin, right? Now, once again, if I get too close to, like, say, this dark area, let me touch it a little bit. What happens is it's trying to grade it together. So what happens, you get a little bit of black there, and I don't really want that. So I'm going to undo that. Okay, so I'm just going to keep on going here. Like I said, it works really well in these areas. And I'm just going to continue to go down. So all these little blotchy areas, it gets rid of them. It starts to really blend the tonal values together really, really well. And once again, you kind of start to see the blemishes even more, because now the tones are together well, but the blemishes are still there, which we're going to take care of in just a little bit. So what I could also do is zoom in a little bit, Command plus, and start to find and fine tune a little bit more area. And you can keep on going and going and work with yours that works best to start to really bring together some of those. And obviously, if we look at Liquify versus the frequency separation, we start to see some really cleaning of the skin, really smoothing it out, right? So that's starting to look really, really nice. So getting rid of some of that blotchiness and evening out the tones of the skin. And you can do that quite a bit, which is really, really nice. The next thing we're looking at here, in terms of that, you can also take that texture layer, and actually you could also take the texture layer and actually reduce the texture layer opacity, and that would actually even make it less texture, even more like of a glow, we could say actually. So I'm going to take that on the texture layer, go to my opacity, and I'm going to bring it down a little bit. Now, if I bring it down all the way, we have no texture. We're just back down to the skin layer there. So if I bring it up a little bit, and maybe even 80%, I still got some texture, but now it's looking a lot more smooth. But if I go up all the way 100%, you'll see even more texture, more noise, more grain, which is fine. It's sharpening. But like I said, you're able to bring it down a little bit and get a little more glow, and it's even smoother, but you still have some definite smooth skin tones in there. Now, the next thing I want to do is now that we're happy with the frequency separation, it's cleaned up, it really made the nice tonal values in the skin tones looking really good. I want to get rid of all these little blemishes that I see on the skin. Now, I did make a separate texture layer just for the skin tones. If I shut that off, I see all the textures that I want to see there, and I can get rid of them right from here. However, I want to make this as non-destructive as possible. So what I would do is I'm going to merge this together, this grouped layer, these two layers. I'm going to merge them together, and I'm going to start making new layers so I can actually create ways, a new layer where I can remove all these blemishes, and I could, once again, non-destructive way, I could get rid of it, I could erase some parts of it, I could always go back and edit it. Now, if I were just to simply click on my drop-down menu and click on Merge Group, well, this is what happens, and I don't want this. This is a very destructive way. I just got rid of my two layers, and it merged it, it flattened it out, which was great, but it didn't leave behind the two editable frequency separation layers. So I'm going to undo that, Command Z. So what I need to do instead is use a keyboard shortcut that I can't usually really find on here. It's Command Option E. So it would be Control Option E on a PC. So I click on the group layer, Command Option E, and now what I have is the merged flattened version of this group plus the actual layers, editable layers that I can go back to and change anytime. So I'm going to shut those off. I have this merged group here. But what I want to do first is I want to do some editing. I want to play around with the blemishes. Now there's a couple tools I want to use, but I want to show them all to you. Now some you might use and some you might not. The first one I'm going to show you is the patch tool. Now the patch tool, underneath the spot healing brush tool, it allows you to play around and get rid of some of these blemishes and things like that. What I'm going to focus on is the lines, or the bags, we call them, underneath the eyes. And I'm going to clean those up. Now you could use this tool, you don't have to, whatever the case is, but I am going to use it. But the thing about this one, it is a somewhat destructive tool because it uses the pixels directly. It doesn't allow you to sample pixels from other layers and use them on a new layer, which I'm going to show you that later. So what I'm going to do, I am going to label this one patch. And I'm going to use the patch tool just on the bags and these eyes. So what I'm going to do, what I need to do is select a little bit above and a little bit below the line. So I'm going to select a little bit above with the patch tool and a little bit below the line. And now what I want to do is, as long as on my control panel, my source is selected, what I can do is click and drag. And now what I'm telling Photoshop is like, see these pixels down here I'm dragging? Use these pixels to blend in this area, which it just did. Now that line is gone, that bag line is gone, but I'm not done yet. With my selection still on, it's called marching ants because it looks like marching ants, I guess. I'm going to go to edit and fade patch selection. So now what I have the opportunity to say how much of that selection I just made, how much I want it to show. Do I want to bring back the line 100%? Or do I want to kind of fade it out little by little? Because 100%, it just kind of got rid of everything. At about 50%, it brings back a little bit of the line, but it really smooths it out. So that's definitely what I want. Now what I can do to get rid of this selection is go to select, deselect, or Command D or Control D on a PC. Or I could just click and drag my next line, which I want, and it'll get rid of that selection as well. Okay, so there's my next selection. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to click and drag, bring it down, and there I go. But this time, once again, edit, fade, patch selection, and I'm going to bring it down to about 50% or so, just roughly where I want it to be. Once again, your picture might be different than mine, so you play it with it the way you feel, and I'll press OK. Now, one thing I want to explain about the something that's selected. So let's pretend now I want to paint something. I'll go to my paintbrush. I got the purple ready to go to paint. If I start painting, I'm clicking, I'm painting, nothing's happening. Well, because I have a selected area, what's going to happen is only that area is going to be changed. So if I start painting, it will only happen inside that area. So I'm going to undo that, obviously. So anytime you're trying to do something and you were just selecting and it's not working, well, make sure you deselect, or else you won't be able to access any other pixels. The selected area is the only area that's really active. So go to select, deselect, or once again, Command D. And now I'm good. I've fixed up my bags under the eyes. They're looking good. And now what I want to do is do some more non-destructive blemish work where I'm cleaning up all these areas, and they're called healing brushes. So I'm going to work with the spot healing brush. So what I'm going to do here, above the patch layer, I'm going to add a new blank layer. There's nothing to this layer. And with this layer, what I can do now is I'm going to use my spot healing brush tool. Now what the spot healing brush tool does, it'll automatically remove blemishes just by clicking and gone. I'm going to click it once and I'm going to show you what I mean. So I click on here, and it slowly goes, especially this one slowly goes away. I click on here, gone. Click on there, gone. Click on here, gone. So all these little blemishes just start to disappear. What Photoshop is doing is when I click, it's selecting similar pixels in the area and covering over the problem that I'm clicking on. Now there's a few options here. Right now I'm sampling all the layers. If I didn't sample all the layers, nothing would happen because there's nothing to select. Exactly. So what I need to do is sample all the layers. And really the only layer I want to sample is the patch layer. So I could shut this one off and it would only allow me to select the pixels from this layer, which is really, really good. Now the other options are, I have the content aware option on, which Photoshop uses AI, artificial intelligence, and it says, yeah, we understand you want to get rid of this area once you click, so we're going to choose pixels from around the area to get rid of it. And if I use create texture, once again, it adds an extra little bit of texture from the surrounding area. And proximity match and content aware are very similar, where proximity matches, it'll select a similar pixels from the area as well. But I do like content aware and going to work with that. Now, once again, just click and drag, or just click. Good. Now, if you click and drag accidentally or whatever the case, it's going to mess some things up. Photoshop is trying to figure out, okay, what do you want me to do here, right? So it's not going to be perfect. So you do have to work with it a little bit. So this one I'm going to call healing. And the other thing you should do, obviously, make sure you save your file as you go. Make sure you create new snapshots as you go in your history panel to make sure that's all well and good. So I'm just going to save this now properly, and save it in your proper organized folder. So I'm going to save as, and I'm going to desktop, and I'll name this properly. Last name, first initial, section, and I'm going to call this touch up. And I'm obviously would also put the day, the month, and the year. And once again, I'm working in Photoshop 2021, and just to give a heads up of, in years when this changes and more updates come, you're obviously going to know, oh, some tools have changed or whatever the case is. So here I am, and I want to now use another brush, which is called the healing brush. So what the healing brush does is very similar to the spot healing brush, except now I have to tell Photoshop where to take the pixels from, and that's totally fine. I can increase my brush size using the open and close bracket. I could zoom in, Command plus. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to hold down Option, and look, my cursor turns into a target. I'm going to hold down Option and click. Now what I've done, I've told Photoshop, this is where I want you to take the pixels from. So when I click, it's gone. Hold down Option and click, and get rid of that blemish. Hold down Option and click that area, and it uses the... Now it doesn't take the exact pixels from the area. What it does, it takes the light and dark areas from that area to help me blend in and get rid of some of the disturbing pixels from that area, the ones that are really standing out like that. It even shows me what it might look like if I click in that area right now. So that's the healing brush tool and the spot healing brush tool. Once again, it helps me out. I click, hold on Option and click, and there we go. Kind of helps me out there a little bit. So that's the healing brushes. Now the other brush, more or less, we could use is the clone stamp. Now I'm going to make a new layer again, and this one I'm going to call clone. Now the clone stamp does very similar to what the healing brush does, but instead of just taking light and dark areas of those pixels, it takes the actual pixels. So what I want to do, I want to get rid of this net that's holding the wig in place. And what I can do is with my clone stamp, my new layer, once again, make sure sample current and below. Sure, I could do current and below or all layers, but just make sure that the highlight and shadow layer is shut off because it's going to try to sample from that as well. So I'm going to sample all layers. I'm going to click here, option click, or alt click in your area here. And I'm just going to start clicking and dragging. That's it. Gone. Right? Alt, option and click. Now that's not what I wanted there. So what I'll do, I wanted more of this area. So alt, option and click, and I pick pixels from that area. I want to get rid of this bit of hair here. It matches these pixels, and I can do that. Now my opacity is at 100%. If I wanted to slowly build up, I could. But as I slowly build up, I start to lose some of the texture too, because it becomes a little bit smoother, which I don't necessarily want. I want to keep that texture intact. But it can work out if you slowly work with your picture. Your picture might be different than mine. I have to keep on mentioning that. Now, the other situation is I do want to show you the extreme version of the clone stamp. If I option click this target area and just start painting, it's going to bring it up. Now remember, I'm at 25%. Okay. If I make it 100%, once again, option click, and it shows me where it's at, and then I'm just one click and one drag. I'm not clicking and dragging. And that's it. It kind of blends it in a little bit, but not too much. Now, just to show you, this is more or less what that tool does specifically. But keep in mind, every time you click, a new step is added to your history panel, okay? So just keep that in mind. So you might have to go back a few more steps. Okay, great. Now, one more I want to do. We've done our healing. We're happy with what we've done here. Maybe we can get rid of a few more blemishes, but maybe you keep some to make it very much more like, hey, this is what skin looks like. This is what happens. And there's nothing wrong with that. So the next thing I want to do, I want to sharpen the eyes. I want to bring out some really strong contrast in the eyes and lips and make it look really, really good. Once again, I could turn my highlight and shadow layers back on to see what I'm working with. I can shut them back off because I'm going to do this part now too. So I'm going to create a new layer again, because normally what I'm about to do is a destructive thing. But because I'm putting it on a new layer, it's going to be non-destructive. I could always shut these off anytime I want. Once again, I could shut off my clone stamp anytime I want. Let me zoom out. I could shut off my healing anytime I want and bring back all those blemishes that I just got rid of. Or play with them a little bit more, lower the opacity, whatever the case is. So here I'm going to make a new layer. It's going to be called Sharpen. Okay, cool. So I'm going to zoom in. And now what I want to do, I want to zoom in the eyes, and I'm going to sharpen up the eyes. So this tool right here, the Sharpen tool, which might be under the blur tool or whatever, what it does, it just brings out the really high contrast the more I brush it in on the eyes. So I'm just going to click on this part. I'm on my Sharpen selected. It's sampling all the layers, so I do have to be careful that this one's off. And I'm just going to start brushing. And as I brush, it's going to bring out those high contrasts in those areas that I'm brushing. Just a few passes, that's all it takes. And you see it sharpens it a little bit. Now, my strength is at 100%, but I could slowly build it up with 50% or whatever the case is. However I want to do that. But I'm just bringing out some very strong, sharp areas that I really want to pop. So now the eyes pop a little bit more. Once again, if I want to shut it off, say, did that do anything? Yeah, I like the way that works. It brings this shine to the eyes, okay? So there we have our sharpening. We've done some healing, gotten rid of some of those blemishes. You could do so much more with it. I'm just kind of going a little bit quicker just to show you things you can do, but you should take your time with your photo to really fine tune it. So next what we can do, I'm going to actually bring some grouping together. So my organizing here is looking pretty good because at least I named everything properly. I'm a big fan of that, but you know, I could turn my highlights and shadows back on, see if they still make sense, which they do. I could always go back and readjust, but I can now look at adjustment layers. And now we have to remember something. We are in RGB color mode. So any adjustment layers I make right now, okay, I could add any one I want of these adjustment layers, and any one I add in RGB is going to be fine. They're going to work. But the second I convert to CMYK, they're not going to show up. They're going to disappear. So we don't want that. So I'll explain what we could do later about that. But in the meantime, let's look at adjustment layers. So adjustment layers could be accessed a few different ways, and they can be destructive or non-destructive, which we definitely want non-destructive. So at the top here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to click on this black and white circle at the bottom of the layer panel, and what we have here are a bunch of great adjustment layers. The other way we could look at it is go to Window, and we can go to Adjustments, and then it shows up here. Now it's the exact same thing: brightness, contrast, levels, curves. Once again, brightness, contrast, levels, curves. These are just the icons pertaining to it. Click on one, it doesn't matter, and your properties panel is going to open up and show you exactly what it is. So let's pretend I want to go brightness, contrast. There it is, it shows up. So I click on, I know that this is brightness contrast by the icon. It's linked to a mask. Now, we haven't really discussed masks very much before, but we're going to talk about them a little bit. So it has a mask here. Now, all a mask does is show or hide something. If there's black, it's hiding something. If it's white, it's showing something. So right now, everything is shown in there. I'm going to discuss them just a little bit as we go. So here, what I can do, if I could back up a little bit, and I am going to close this because now the simplest way to do it is here. I'm going to play around with brightness and contrast. Now, for this particular project, I want you to use quite a few. I want you to use at least 5. But the idea behind it, just by looking at the camera raw filter, which is kind of this very similar thing. You're adding slight adjustments to do something to the picture, to enhance it somehow, make it brighter, make it darker, better contrast, warmer tones, cooler tones, whatever the case is. There's all these little tweaks you can make to adjust it. So right now, the first one I'm going to try out, I'm going to do brightness contrast and just play around. So once again, I can click on auto and see what auto suggests, what Photoshop suggests I can do, and there it is. Now, once again, if I do or don't want that, that's fine. It did make a difference. And I can always click off of the visibility to see, what kind of difference it made. It's a subtle difference, but it's a difference, and maybe I like it, maybe I don't, but I could always go back and play around with it. So let's see what an extreme amount does. Let's see what the opposite does. It always gives us a good idea of where we want to be. So if I go really high contrast, and once again, maybe you're looking for a certain look, we could always play around with that. So where do I want to be with this? Maybe I do want to go a little bit brighter. Maybe I want to have a little bit more contrast there. That's totally fine. Once again, I can turn it on and off and see, okay, where am I? Is it too much? Is it too little? Play around, right? So the next one I'm going to add, or I'm actually just going to show you, I'm going to add more, but I could also find adjustments under image adjustments. And if I click on any one of these, if I click on, say, I go to levels. Now, if you'll notice something, I could play with levels. Sorry, my apologies. I'm on that layer. I was putting levels on the wrong layer. Let's pretend I'm on the patch layer and I click on level adjustment layers here, adjustments, and I'm going to click on hue saturation. Notice something that just happened. A new layer did not show up. It just is applying this particular adjustment directly to these pixels. That's not a good thing. I don't want that. So using the adjustments here, not a good idea. So ideally, you want to either use these adjustments, which are all the same, but it's just how we access them, these adjustments here, or we want to use the adjustments here. Now there is the option to add a new adjustment under layer, new adjustment layer, and then it would add the new layer. So there's actually 4 different ways to access these, but I strongly recommend, just to keep it simple, use this black and white circle. It's so much easier. Your layer panel is always going to be open anyways. So here I am once again. I'm on the black and white circle adjustment layer, and I'm going to add levels. Let's look at what levels do. Levels give us an idea of, once again, contrast, the lights and the darks and the midtones. I can really control them. So these are my darks. So if I bring my darks over, it gets even darker. I'm making everything much, much darker. If I bring over my highlights, my lights areas, I'm making everything much brighter. And my midtones, obviously I could work with my midtones. So once again, if I want to, I could really play around. I can see how the brightness and the darkness, adding more black, adding more white, what it does to my image. You don't really want to mess with the histogram too much. It should make sense where your lights are and darks are. But there might be something there to tweak, and you could really definitely play around with that there. And once again, if I'm happy with it, I could turn it on and off and say, yeah, it does something interesting. It's good. I like it. Great. Let's add a few more. Curves. Curves panel we talked about before in the camera raw filter. Once again, it's a good idea in just looking at it as a T and an X. Okay. So if I'm in the middle, I have the middle here. I'm playing with the curvature here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to click in the middle. One click in the middle does absolutely nothing. So if I look, let's look at the T option. If I go T and I go up, it's making it much, much brighter. Okay. If I am in the middle and I go down, much, much darker. Okay. Now let's follow the same. If I go to the right, what happens? Much darker and interesting effects with the color. And to the left, Once again, much brighter, really washing it right out. Okay, so that's the T effect. Now, if I bring it up to the top right corner, okay, not much is happening. If I bring it right to the bottom right corner, once again, a little bit darker. This is your darker area. If I bring it up to my top left, once again, washing out. Bottom right corner, same idea. So it all depends on where we want to go with it, what we want to do. Darker here, lighter up here. Okay, so let's just play around and see where we want to go. I love it because it's real time. You're seeing exactly little tiny adjustments being made as you go here. Let's say I'm happy right there. Fine. Now this is the RGB channel. You're using every channel is being worked with. Now if you just want to be specific on a certain channel, say I just want to work at the red channel. Okay, well what do I want to do? Do I want to add more red? Do I want to take some red away? So, okay, so that's kind of an issue too, where you know what, I don't want any changes to that. Or maybe I just want to tweak it a little bit, add a little warmth, a little too red, maybe want to draw it back a little bit. It's entirely up to you, but you have the RGB channels to work with whenever you want. So you can do red, green, or blue, or just go back to RGB. Once again, you can click on auto. It'll give you an automatic version of what it thinks would work best for this. Let's try it out, see what we can do. And once again, it adds a little bit of warmth. It adds a little bit more contrast. Cool. Let's try a few more. Exposure. Let's see what exposure does. Once again, we're just seeing overexposing it, underexposing it. This is what it does. Offset, what it does. And we could just keep on playing and playing and playing. Once again, turn it on and off. And if you're like, I like it subtly, that's good. Well, why don't you just bring down the opacity a little bit? So maybe you get 50% and you say, okay, what does that do? Well, it just changes up just subtly enough for whatever you want to do. A few more I want to show you are the color balance. I'm a big fan of color balance because here is where we get to really play around with, you know, really specific color tints to the skin tones, to the background, to whatever the case is. So we could actually start with shadows, and we could add a little red or cyan to the shadows. We could add a little magenta or green to the shadows. Now, if your particular picture already is fairly one-sided, like it's a very yellow picture, well then this is all about color correcting. We bring back some blues, get rid of some yellows, okay? So here with our highlights, we could really add some warmth to our highlights if we want to. So I'm gonna add a little red, just a tiny bit, and a tiny bit of yellow, not too much obviously, but it's always good to see what an extreme amount does. That way you could dial it back and see, is 0 my best, or should I bring it up a little bit or change it? My last one, I'm gonna work with midtones. Once again, a little bit warmer. There we go. And now let's see what that did. Just warmed it up a little bit. So I'm a big fan of that. Now here's one I'm gonna give you. This one's interesting because what it's gonna do, it's gonna create like a little highlight for me. So let's see what it does. So instead of adding a normal just adjustment layer, I'm gonna add a gradient layer, a gradient fill layer. So what it does, it fills the whole canvas with one gradient, one large gradient. So let me zoom out and you'll see exactly what I'm seeing there. Perfect. So now what I have is I'm going to change this because it opens up automatically. I'm going to click on this and it opens up this other box. And that's all I really want to do is change it. And now you have a bunch of different versions to go through, tons of different presets. You know, if I'm looking at you know, your neutrals, you could find something maybe you really like there, but really I'm just looking for a basic idea of, well, this one just chooses foreground to background. So I'm just going to make this white. Awesome. And I'm going to bring down this to the transparency. So these two on the bottom, these color stops, are going to be your colors. These two on the top are your opacities. How much of that color is actually showing through. So this side, I want 0 opacity because I want it to be white to nothing so I can see through underneath it. So I have that all set up, and what I'm going to do now is say, okay, that's fine. And now I'm going to change up a few things here. I'm going to make it radial. I'm going to make it the scale to be 130. I want it to be bigger, even bigger than what I currently see. So I can make it really big, or I can make it really small, like a pinpoint of a gradient. So you see what I could do there. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And then what I can do with this is I can start playing around. Now, if I want to move it around, I can move it around. Right now I'm going to align with layer. I'm going to take that off so I can move it around. And currently I can't move it around. Okay, that's all right. So let me click on it again. And let me see if now I can move it around. So once this is up, now I can move that gradient around. It kind of acts like a little bit of a spotlight. Like if I want to shine up here, shine down here, shine down here. I've kind of created this nice little spotlight, but I'm not done yet. So what I can do is I can actually add an overlay to this, or sorry, blending mode. which would be overlay. So I'm on this, I'm going to say overlay, blending mode. And there I go. So now it actually adds a really, really bright spotlight that I may or may not want to play around with. Once again, it's kind of just focusing on the chest. So maybe I could bring that down and just play around a little bit with that lit area. Say I was having problems with the skin, or there was an issue I just couldn't fix. Well, maybe I could actually, place a light there to kind of fix the area, which it kind of does a little bit, quite frankly. And once again, if I want to change the color up a little bit, make it a little bit more of a warmer light, I can just go here, white, and I'll say, you know what, let's make that a little bit more of a warmer tone. So I'm going to bring that down here, and now we can see it actually happening, making it a little bit more warmer, making it yellow. Once again, if I'm going to make it cooler, add a little bit more blue, and there we go. And once again, I could bring it down if I'm not happy with it entirely. So, okay, I'm going to bring it up a little bit. Yeah, I like what it does there at 40%. Looks pretty good. And after that, we're pretty good. Now I have quite a few here. You can continue to play around, but there's so many. Even if hue saturation, you want to bring down the saturation a little bit. You don't want, not black and white, but you just want to tone down some of the color. You could totally do that. Add lightness. So you can make it a little bit brighter, a little bit darker, whatever you want to do. This is kind of also like exposure, too much light, too much dark, whatever you want to do. And we can really, really, really fine tune so many things, which obviously we don't want to do that either. Just showing you. A lot of options, play around, have a good time with adjustment layers, see what all of them do, see what they do for you, because there's a lot you can do with those. Now here, ideally what I want to do, I'm going to select one, I'm going to select the top one, hold down Shift, select them all, Command G, I'm going to group them all, or Control G on a PC, and I'm just going to say adjustments. All right, there's my adjustments layers. Great, and now those are all together. Once again, shutting them off, turning them on, that's the difference. And remember, from before, what we could always do is turn on our original, and I'm going to start grouping a few things together so I make it even easier for myself. This is the original, so let's look at what the original looks like with and without some of these things. So if I got rid of that, I could see where my original was, how the skin tone has changed because of my frequency separation, my Liquify. A lot has changed from my original. And even getting rid of some of the healing, bringing back some of the healing. So I'm even going to group my healing because I'm going to consider Sharpen, Clone, and Healing all a part of healing. I select them all, Command G, and I click on, and they're all healing. Okay, so even these bottom ones, I'm even going to do something a little bit more here. I'm going to click on these bottom ones, as they're kind of like my base ones that I'm looking at. They're my base. So I'm just going to click on these here, and these are the ones that kind of got me to where I am right now. And I'm just going to click on that and Command G once again. And I'm just going to say base. Those are my base colors, or sorry, my base foundation ones. I could always go back and check any of these ones off, fix them up, do whatever I want, edit them. So I have a base layer of all my foundational work. I have a healing layer of all my healing work. I have my highlights and my shadows as well that I can work with. I could still go back to, and you know what, I could even consider them adjustments as well, so I could actually sneak those in. So I wanted to show you this as well. Just because I already have an existing group doesn't mean I can't put more things in that group. So with my adjustments, well, really we could consider the dodge and burn, or the highlights and shadows, an adjustment as well. So I could bring those into my new folder, or this adjustments folder. I could even drag them right in, see that blue line it creates, and now they're a part of adjustments. Or I could bring them right to the top. Now they're on top of all the adjustments. Okay, so they do affect, whatever's on top affects everything below it. Okay, so if I put the hue and saturation at the very bottom, it's not affecting anything. And whatever's on top affects what's below it. So all these adjustments, if these adjustments right now are on top, they affect everything below it. If these adjustments are on the very bottom, they would affect nothing. All right, so whatever's on top affects what's below it, unless you're making clipping masks or things like that, which we're not doing just yet or right now. Okay, I have a certain look I'm happy with. Now what I want to do at the end of all of this is I want to select everything, all my groups, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to, once again, I'm going to merge these, but I have to merge them in a very specific way. Command Option E or Control Option E on a PC, because I want my layers to stay, but so I can go back and edit them, but I do want a flattened version of this. Now this is what's going to save us when we convert to CMYK, and we're able to keep all our adjustments and no issues are going to happen there. It's going to look the exact same. So my next step is I'm going to remove the background. So let's look at removing the background. So I'm going to hold Command Option E and flatten everything. And what should happen is, quite frankly, nothing. I have a flattened version, nothing should change. If I shut this off, turn this back on, there shouldn't be any change in adjustments, lightness, brightness, anything. Everything should stay the same, and I could shut everything off if I want to. Once again, if I want, I could shut this off, say, where am I from where I was to where I am now? Big, big difference, right? And I could have obviously done so much more work too. So here I am with my my current layer, and now I'm going to remove the background. So there's a few different ways to do this now too. Photoshop is always changing and always learning how to cut things out better, the best way to do it, right? So with my adjustment layer, or my now final layer, realistically, I'm going to be able to remove the background. I'm going to change the name of this in just a little bit. So what I can do with this is there's a few options. And with my properties panel open, there's one right here. I could remove the background, and let's just try it and see what happens. Now keep in mind there is a white background there. So if I just remove the background, let's see how Photoshop works with removing the background. Once again, that's a properties panel. You can find it under window, under properties. So remove background. Now remember, this image is once again great for another reason. It has a limbo background, a very basic, simple, nothing background, who cares? So it's easy to cut out, it's easy to get rid of. Let's see how well it did. I'm gonna take this lock off of this layer, and I'm just going to click on this, double click, and just pick a new color. Actually, I'm not even gonna do it this way. I'm gonna show you this way. I could double click on layer style and make a new color. Let's just make it red for now to really give us a difference. And because I have that on and the background is cut out, I should be able to see that color, but for some reason I'm not seeing that color. That's why, because the base was still on. My apologies. This is underneath. Now it did a pretty good job cutting things out. It's not bad. That's, wow, really good. But it could be better. So let's undo that, and we're not going to worry about that so much. So I'm going to go to my history panel and just get rid of some of that stuff, because I want to show you a little bit more control you could have over removing the background. So once again, there's properties, and you can once again select the subject. Let's just select the subject and see how well it does selecting the subject, because really that's either one we want to do. We want to select the subject or remove the background, and we definitely want to remove the background, but let's see what that did. It did a pretty good job of selecting the hair. Hair is the hardest thing to select, and that is a problem. But this did a pretty good job of selecting the subject, but keep in mind, there were some pretty hard edge areas. The harder edge areas are easy to find. It's the hair and fuzzy areas and things like that that are much harder to find. So I'm gonna let go of that too, Command D, and get rid of that, or Control D on a PC. What I want to do, I want you to try this out, is I want you to choose on this magic wand tool, I want you to actually choose the quick selection tool. So now with the quick selection tool, what it does, it's going to quickly select, Photoshop is going to help me quickly find some edges of the background. The background's easier to select than the subject. So what happened there? I clicked and then it cut in right into her hair. That's okay. We can fix that later. I'm going to keep on selecting. Oh, it cut into her hair again. That's okay. I'm going to select here and select here. Did a pretty good job of there, but not the hair. So what I need to do now, because it selected too much, is I could zoom in a little bit. And I just want to select the subject. See what happens to my cursor when I press Option or Alt on a PC. It goes from a plus sign, which is adding, and goes, when I click on Option, it goes to a subtract sign. So I want to subtract some of the painting I did. Okay, and then if I want, I could add a little bit back in, go slowly and add it back in. Okay, little by little, I'm adding back in. There we go. And now I want to subtract some of this background. And now it's coming up to the edge of the hair. That's looking pretty good. And once again, this does not have to be perfect by any means. See how I keep on having a few issues when it gets a little too close to the edge there. That's looking pretty good right there. Good. So now I have a decent selection. Oh, it cut off the arm. And once again, it does not have to be perfect, but I do want to select just the subject. Okay. Even that's not problematic. We'll fix it. We could always fix that later. So I have my subject, have the marching ants all around it looking pretty good. Okay, that's all right. Good. So now what I can do, I can actually go to this top part here. Remember, anytime you have a tool selected, the control panel gives you another option here. I'm going to go to select and mask. I selected mask. And now it brings me to this other panel, just like Camera Raw, just like Liquify, brings me to a new panel that is going to take over for a little bit, and then I can always go back and fix it. Now, once again, just like Liquify, there's some manual options, manual tools on the left, and some options here on the right. So what I can do is I'm going to start playing around with this. And I can actually, now, yours might not be set up this way, so I could show the edge, I could show original, real-time refinement, which is what I want to see. Opacity, so the opacity of that color, I'm going to choose that. Yours might be a different view. The view I suggest is overlay. You might have something different. Overlay is always ideal. You can pick the different color you want here, but at least it gives you an option to see, okay, what is selected and what's not selected. Obviously, everything in red is not selected, and we want to kind of refine her hair and any kind of issues we have there. So what I want to do is I'm going to go to this, I could choose a color aware mode or object aware, and both might actually be beneficial to me. You might want to try either one out, but let's say we are going to look for object aware mode. And that's totally fine. Don't show again. It's going to change up how it might see the object, which is fine, because what I'm doing now, I'm asking Photoshop to help me. Say, help me find the edge of the hair, help me find the edge of the body, help me find the background versus the foreground. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn on Smart Radius, and I'm just going to click and drag and bring up my Smart Radius and start to see how the hair is being edged out, like what is actually being seen as foreground and what's actually being seen as background. And as it starts to grow and things start to change, and once again, it's not going to be perfect, but it's getting close. And I got to say, Photoshop is getting better and better and better at finding edges, especially on hair. So once again, I could play around the radius. I brought it all the way up and it looks pretty good, but I could always change this and refine this again too. I could play around with smoothing. What does smoothing do? Does smoothing make it any better, any worse? I'm not seeing any changes, too many changes. It's looking okay, not too many changes there. What if I feather? Does feathering change anything? It should feather out the edges a little bit more. Maybe I don't want that to happen too much. Contrast. Oh, I see a little bit harder edges. I see sharper edges. Does that help? So we could play around, and once again, your image is going to be different than mine, potentially. Shift the edge. Oh, that does something. Let's see if we go the opposite way, and if it grows that edge a little bit more. And I'm kind of liking what that's happening there too. So that's pretty cool. So shift edge is working out for us. But now there is another option here we can do. If we look at these tools we have here, we could go refine edge brush tool, which is the tool we want. I can zoom in a little bit. And what I can do is I can see my brush right now. I can make it bigger or smaller. I can start to find a bit of difference here if I want, and start clicking and dragging around the edge of the hair. Let's just see what happens when I click and drag around the edge of the hair. I let go. Oh, okay. Photoshop now understands, oh, I was looking for this too. Okay, good. And they add a little bit extra, so I'm going to click and drag again. Good. Oh, it got rid of that white space there. Let's see if it gets rid of this white space up here when I click and drag. Click and drag around the edge. Yeah, I did a pretty good job up there. So now it's starting to understand, oh, you're looking for a slightly different edge than I found. Okay, that's fine. So I'm just going to click and drag again. It finds that tight edge. I had a bit of an issue here, right? So I'm just going to click and drag. Once again, it found that perfect edge there. A little bit of an issue here. Let's see if it fixes it. Wow, really, really good. Okay, so you could always go back, but even this still isn't the end. And even in here, there's a little bit of an issue here. If you really wanted to, you could even clone stamp that area from before and just bring in more hair. It's entirely up to you. So it kind of found a really good job. It did a great job trying to go around my hair. Once again, not perfect, but it's good. So what I want to go now down is to output settings. And with the output settings, what I can do, which is, this is important because it can make something destructive or non-destructive. Do I want to just choose a selection? No. Do I want just a layer mask? No. Or a new layer? I want new layer with layer mask. Not a new document, just a new layer with layer mask. Remember, being non-destructive is adding more layers. So new layer with layer mask. I'm going to click on that, and then I'm just going to say OK. All right, so I have a new layer with the layer mask. Remember, what's white can be seen and what's black is hidden. So I've cut the model out pretty good. So now what I can do, I can start adding in my own background, which is what I want you to do for this assignment. I want you to add in your own background so you've proven that there is a good cutout version of the figure. So what I want to do is I'm going to play around with choosing a fill. So I'm going to do, once again, another adjustment layer. I'm going to do a gradient fill. And with that gradient fill, I am going to play around with some colors that are going to hopefully accent her, make her pop, or make her change it up a little bit, or make it harmonious. And let me cancel that really quickly because I want to go actually underneath. I want to go behind her. So I'm going to click on the layer just below that main layer. And now I'm going to click on gradient. Okay, so now the gradient that's given to me right away was the one that's foreground to background. Now obviously I want to change that up. We've already seen this panel before, so I click on the gradient. And now I can start playing around with different colors. Now the thing that I like to do is I like to choose colors that are already there using the eyedropper. So if I click on this color, I click on the actual color. Actually, I don't even need to click on the actual color. As I hover over the artboard, my cursor turns into an eyedropper. So I could actually just start choosing colors from the actual picture. Look at that. I could choose some of the dark areas, some of those grays, or I could choose some of the light areas. I'm going to click on this one here. I'm going to bring back that opacity up to 100%. Okay. Oh, I went too far. Pressed enter. I'm going to click on this one. Now I'm going to choose another color. Let's choose a brighter color, maybe a darker color to help her stand out. But keep in mind, you don't want that kind of too much of a halo effect around her hair. So maybe I will go a little bit lighter, try to find a lighter color that won't give me too much of that halo. There we go. That looks pretty cool too. Now, realistically, you can choose any colors you want, but it's got to make sense. If someone says, you know, it's going to be a retro theme or we're looking to use these particular colors, then you got to use those colors. But if you can, I suggest choosing colors from the actual model that help harmonize or at least help it stand out or complement whatever. So I'm really happy with this one. So I'm just going to say, okay, nice gradient, looks good, and I'm good to go there. Okay, so now I have my gradient. I have my cutout image here. So the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to add in some more organization here. I'm going to group these two layers together. And once again, I could have labeled this something different. I wouldn't mind holding on to this because this is the merging of all these folders. So I'm just going to keep this as is, adjustments merged, and it tells me exactly what it is. So I'm totally happy with that. These ones I could merge as well, and this could be actually Command G. Let's just say final. So I selected those two and made another grouped layer. Those are my final ones there. Okay, because with my cutout and my gradient, I'm happy with that. And I could even call this one cutout if I want, so I know that's the cutout. And I remove that background, that's a gradient fill, which is awesome. So now I can start to play with converting this to CMYK, okay? So to convert to CMYK, once again, let's just see what happens because this is considered an adjustment. Let's see what happens if I convert to CMYK if anything changes. So let me zoom out. And now I'm going to convert to CMYK to prepare it and make it a TIFF. So let's see how that works. So image, mode, CMYK. Do I want to flatten it? No, just okay, leave it alone. Great. Now it changed a little bit. See that? It changed just a little bit in that color. So that means I need to flatten it even more. So in my history, I'm going to make sure I'm still on RGB. And I noticed obviously there was an issue with that color. When I converted this to CMYK, it slightly changed. I don't want anything to change. And that's good. So this final one right here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to merge it one last time. Okay. So here it is. Final. I clicked on it. Command Option E or Control Option E. And now it's merged. Now there's no adjustment layer that can change. Nothing can change on this. So there's my final. It's merged. Now what I can do, I can go to Image, Mode, CMYK, and nothing should change. There we go. So once again, if I go back, before CMYK, after, before, after, Nothing changes in terms of the color, which is totally perfect, exactly what I wanted. Now I'm ready to make a TIFF. So with this now, but remember, I do have to switch back to RGB because I want the PSD saved as an RGB, so you can go back and still play around with adjustments and do whatever you want. But the TIFF that we're about to make has to be CMYK because we're going to send it to print. We're going to pretend to send it to print. So now that I'm ready, I'm complete. I'm happy with it. It looks great. I'm not going to make any more adjustments just yet. I'm going to go to File, Save As. And here is something a little bit different that Photoshop does. So now, once again, I could have saved it as a PSD, which it is. I should always save my file. I should have continued to save. But now here, I'm going to save it as a copy. Because right now, it does offer me TIFF, but it's a little bit different. So I'm going to say save a copy, which is what I want. And remember to save it in your organized file, okay? Save it under this particular name of this project. Save it under links, and this is where that would go. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to get rid of the word copy. I'm going to save it as a drop down here to TIFF. Okay. So as a TIFF, I'm going to say save. It's got the right name on it. Perfect. And I'm going to look at this really quickly. Image compression, none. That's the best thing about the TIFF, that you can compress it, but we don't want to compress it. It's got great quality and it is a decent file size. It's not massive. It's not small. It's good. It has the right amount of quality. Now, realistically, if I had a transparency behind here, let's pretend I had got rid of the background. There was no background. I could just say save transparency, but this file knows that yes, there is a background on there. So that's fine. But if you ever wanted to save any image without a background, save it as a TIFF, transparency. PNG file format also recognizes transparencies. The last thing I want to do is discard the layers and save a copy. So remember, think about this. Your Photoshop file, the PSD document, has all the layers, all the editable things you want to do. That's great. The TIFF is very similar to the PSD file, but it's flattened. There are no layers on it, and that's what I want, because that's also going to save you file size. If you save the layers with it, it's just like saving it as a PSD file. We don't want the layers. We want it to all be just a flattened TIFF with all this great pixel information. So I'm just going to say, okay, done. It's saved. I could look right here. I have it saved as a TIFF. It looks perfect. And I have my PSD. So remember, it's a CMYK right now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back in my history. This is very important. And go back one step. Now it's RGB again. And look what I have. I have everything here. I have all my base layers, my original, my camera raw, my liquify, frequency separation. If I want to go back, I could change it. And that patchwork I did under the eyes, which is almost a flattened version of frequency separation. Great. Healing. I have my sharpen, my clone, my healing, all the different healing I did. I have my highlights and shadows. I have all my adjustments that I've made there as well. Okay. And I have my merged adjustments and then my final and then my merged final. So there's a lot of work we did, and there's even more you could probably do. There's a ton more you could do, but I want to keep it somewhat simple for now. And this looks pretty good. So I'm fine with this. So remember, save this and Command S. I'm going to save that, or File and Save. Now I have my properly saved PSD. I have my properly saved TIFF. Now we're going to go and work in Illustrator to finalize the project. Now that I'm complete, like I said, I'm going to bring it over to Illustrator, but just before I do, what I do want to do is organize my files now. My layers are organized, everything's great. So I save this PSD, that's fine. So I'm actually going to close it now. Command S and then Command W. Command W actually closes out tabs. This is my other one I was working with, but I'm going to close it out, Command W, and there I go again. I'm not going to save it. And another one, this is the original image. I'm not going to save it. I'm just going to close it. Okay. So now if I go to my desktop here, let me organize my folder, because this is very important, especially because I'm going to link in the TIFF into Illustrator. So let me set up a properly organized folder, a new folder. I'm just going to call this Assignment 4, which was touch up. And I'm just going to leave it at that. That's fine. You can name it whatever you want, but something descriptive. And I'm going to put in now my proper folders. What folders do I have? I have a PSD folder. I'm going to have an AI folder for Illustrator. I'm going to have a links folder for my links. I'm going to have a final folder for my PDF. And I'm going to have a resource folder for the actual initial image I had. So there's my initial image. So let me organize all this. Now everything's closed, everything's been saved properly. So there's the initial image, it's going in resource, great. Here is my TIFF, it's going in my links panel. Here's my PSD, it's going in my PSD folder. And there I go. So just to give a quick idea of the difference between the Photoshop file and the TIFF. So let's take a look. The PSD is 264 megabytes, and remember, it has all the layers, all the editable versions. I can go back and change anything I want anytime. And the links, I have the TIFF, it's only 33 megabytes. But once again, it's that great quality, but it is a lower file size. So that's really, really cool. So what I mean by no layers, I'm gonna bring this back into Photoshop and take a look at it. No layers, it's one flattened version of that entire thing, where the Photoshop version, the full proper PSD, has all the layers again that I could take a look at, and I can edit and I can go back and change anything I want anytime. That's what I mean by non-destructive. Okay, so now let's open up Illustrator and we're going to take a look and see what we can do here. All right, so in Illustrator, here I am. I'm going to open up a new document, file, new, Command N if you want, Control N if you're on a PC. Once again, I'm not going to look at the presets, I'm just going to focus here. And if I remember, it's 8 by 10.875. So 8 inches wide, 10.875 high. That's a standard dimension for most magazines. There obviously are many different sizes, but this is kind of a standard one. It's in inches. There's one artboard. That's great. Now I could give myself a bleed because it's smaller than 11 by 17. It's going to be 0.125 all the way around. And remember, we made our Photoshop document a little bit larger, so it'll fit our bleed area. So it should fit in quite perfectly. The color mode is going to be CMYK, that's totally fine. Raster effects, which we're not really going to use any unless you want to. You can keep it at 300, that's totally fine. So I'm just going to create this and see what we got. So our artboard should show up and it should have that red line around it, which it does, and that's our bleed area. So now what I can do, because I've organized my file so well, I'm going to open this up just really quickly and see, yeah, no AI, there's my no final yet, there's my link, that's what I'm going to bring in, Photoshop file, and my resource. So with my links, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to place it in Illustrator, File, Place, and I'm going to find that folder I have on my desktop. Once again, it was A4 Touch-Up. I'm going to go to my links, and I'm going to find that TIFF, and there's the TIFF, and I'm going to place it in. So place, and now Illustrator is saying, yeah, where do you want to put it? I'm just going to drop it in the middle, and I'm just going to click and drag. Now remember, a linked image is suggested by the X. Remember the X through it means it's linked. Plus I can go to my links panel and see, yes, it's linked. There's no little icon here to suggest it's embedded. It's just a linked file. So there it is, linked, perfect, and it fits in my bleeds perfectly. So it's the right size, exactly what I needed, okay? So I'm just going to size it up perfectly, great. So now I have this. Now this is my cover. This is the actual layout area that I'm going to work with. So I'm going to go to my layers panel. That's the picture. I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to call this title. Now you can come up with absolutely any title. I do not care. It's got to make sense. It's just got to kind of be fun, if anything. So I'm just going to make a new layer title, and I'm just going to call this Sure, and play around with some interesting type. Maybe choose a fun typeface because a masthead should be pretty cool. That looks pretty cool, actually. An interesting display typeface. And once again, you have to keep in mind, you know, the picture that you're going to use, and you know, how it's going to look. You know, if you're going to have it set behind, if we are able to actually mask out some of the type, or actually Brittany or your picture, whichever one you chose, but we're just going to lay it over top. Even if it cuts into the image, it's okay. Normally mastheads are actually right at the top, and once again we could play around with this and kind of have some fun with it. So I'm just going to do a little bit of work here and just to see what I could do. Okay, something just like that. It doesn't really matter. And the other thing I'm going to ask you to do too as well is I do want you to come up with a couple blurbs, just some simple stuff you're going to place wherever you want. It should make sense in terms of layout, but once again, magazine covers really don't make sense. What I'm going to do with my type tool, I'm going to click and drag because I do want to keep it within a certain area. So what I did before was, you know, Britney Spears, that's my title, and a little blurb at the bottom underneath would be thanks for all the hard work. Who knows? Anything. It doesn't matter. I really don't care. But it should make sense. It should be fun. You know, even if you want to make it a little bit silly, that's totally fine too. Now, let's see. There is. Great. So I do actually have some nice fonts that go with this typeface. And, you know, usually there's some enticing letters or type that you put on this to make people want to buy it or whatever the case is. But you know what, we're not really too concerned about things like that. We're just playing around right now. And actually, I would even change this typeface to a normal typeface now. Even I've been using Torreno quite a bit lately, which I kind of like. So let me play around with that. So I'm just going to go to my character panel and yeah, just start playing around a little bit. I'm going to show these options so I can see a little bit more. I'm going to make it all caps. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger because we've seen some of these titles get a little bit big. And then I'm going to play around with this type as well, make it a little bit bigger in the character panel. And maybe color it just to make it a little bit more interesting. Okay, so there's one. I can bring that up. It's totally fine. Or actually, you know what? I could probably keep it in both, but let me actually make two separate text boxes. And I'll do another one, you know, something silly. Oh, I spelled her name wrong. My apologies. Pumpkin pie. The best recipe around. Okay, something simple, something silly. Who cares? Maybe I'll change the color of that one too. Once again, just to show some interest. It's actually horrendous what I'm doing, but this is kind of a common thing we see sometimes. You know, they're left justified, they're right justified. They are just all over the place. So just going to play around. But now that contrast is a bit problematic. Once again, we maybe even want to set up a margin for ourselves. So if we want to keep it away, maybe an inch away from everything, we could do that as well. So let me do that. So I'm going to click on a rectangle. And I know that my border for the artboard is 8 by 10.875. So maybe what I'll do is have that set up, and I'm going to take an inch away from so I'm more or less half an inch away from all sides. So I'm going to take away 1 inch from the width and 1 inch from the height. And now I have that. I'm going to center it on my artboard. I'm just going to click center and center. My line panel's here. I could also have my line panel down here to help me out if I needed to. So it's centered, and I'm just going to go to view, and I'm going to go to guides and make guides. And I'm also going to view guides and lock my guides, which they already locked. Great. So now once again, I could bring this in just so I know I have my guide area. Now, once again, that's a pretty hefty margin, but once again, you know, it always helps to have that. So keep it nice and clean looking. Okay. So all my type is on this title layer. Even the margin is actually on that title layer too, which is totally fine. Now the other thing I want to do is to convert this type to outlines. Okay, so I'm going to grab that and I'm going to duplicate it. So how do we do that? Click and drag over top of the plus sign, or we can go here and just duplicate the title. So I'm going to say that this is the E type, and you know what, I'm just going to call this the O type. No, sorry, my apologies, opposite way. E type, because this is the editable type on the bottom. I'm going to shut it off. And then the O type, which is the outline type. So now that I have my E type and it's shut off, I have my O type. I'm going to select just my O type. A really quick way to select everything on that layer is actually just to click on the circle here, and it selects everything on that layer, which is really easy. Instead of just locking all the layers and doing that, we could actually just select that, and it selects everything on that layer. I'm going to type and create outlines, and now I have outlines. So I have outline type, I have editable type that I can go back and fix anytime I want. Quick, easy way to do it. And that's kind of it. That's all. You can play around with this as much as you want. Make a crazy, interesting cover. Obviously, your main portrait should be the main focus of that cover, but you could play around with layout and interesting masthead and the name of your magazine. If you want to put a barcode there, you can put a barcode. I don't care. I just want you to have fun with it and play around with the layout a little bit, but this is generally what I'm looking for. And once I'm done here, now I need to make a very specific PDF. So remember, it's going to have to be a small file size, and it's going to have marks and bleeds on it too, because there's bleeds here. So let me show you how to do that. But first, what I want to do is save this file. So file, save as. I could have saved as well. I'm going to go to my desktop, and once again, I'm going to go to my organized file folder. In my AI folder, I'm just going to call it, once again, last name, first initial, section number, touch up, and I like to put the month and the year. And there we go, done. Okay, so now we saved it properly. Say yes, okay, that's good. So now I have my AI files saved. Save it, great. Command S. Now what I can do, I'm going to save a copy. I like to save a copy and make it that PDF. So where am I going to save my PDF? In my final folder. I'm going to go to my final folder, in my organized folder, and that's exactly what I'm going to call it. Same thing, last name, first initial, section number, and it's going to be the PDF. But this time, yes, it's going to be a PDF. I'm going to say save. And now I'm gonna have some things I need to look at. Number one, I do want this to be smallest file size. So meaning it's gonna be for the web, it's gonna be viewed on the web. The quality is gonna be very, very poor, but that's okay. I just want it to be seen really quickly online, but I also do wanna add in marks and bleeds. I do wanna add them in just to get us familiar with, okay, anytime we have bleeds on something, we are going to add our trim marks, okay? And we're gonna add our bleed settings, which is already set up 0.125. For some reason, if you didn't set them up, you can add in, manually put 0.125 in, but once again, we're just going to use our document bleed settings, and that's it. You're done. You don't have to worry about anything else. The one thing I always recommend you do is view the PDF after saving. Make sure the file size is really small, and that's it. We're just going to save it, open it up. Quality is not great, but that's okay. But I do have my trim marks as well, and my bleed as well. So the bleed goes past the trim marks, and I have my trim marks in as well. Looks good. Once again, I could have played around with this a little bit more, have some fun with it, but this is really quickly. I want you to do obviously a better job than this. And that's it. So now I have my organized folder of everything in there. So my A4, I have my AI, I have my final, I have my links, I have my PSD, and I have my resource. Now I don't need to see everything. You don't have to submit this whole thing. You can compress it, zip it, and you can send it to me, which is totally fine. Or you can just give me what I'm asking for, which is the AI, the final, the TIFF, and the Photoshop file. You don't have to send me the link, the original raster image. That's not necessary. So you have everything there, it's all set up, and this is how you do it. So hopefully this helps out. It's going to teach you a lot about Photoshop, a lot about touching photo touches professionally, and just some new cool things you could do with normal photos just to touch them up a little bit, and hopefully you play around and have a pretty good time with it. All right, now this is just a little bit extra, and if you ever want to touch up your portrait, whatever, or any actually picture in general, landscape even, doesn't really matter. We can touch up little specific areas. It doesn't have to be the whole overall piece, which we've done a lot of with our full out adjustments. Now here I am once again. I have access to everything I want, all my editable stuff, but I am just going to work on my final merged version. I'm still in RGB. And once again, we know the steps now. If we're going to do some changes in RGB, add some adjustment layers, we can convert it, flatten it into a one flattened version, convert it to CMYK, save it as a TIFF, and then bring it back to RGB. So now that I'm still in RGB, once again, I have access to everything. So what I want to do, I actually just want to play around a little bit here. You could do whatever you want, but I'm just going to show you a few things you could do, and we're going to be using masking. Now, we are still already familiar with masks, what we've seen before. When we made that select and mask, it made a mask next to the actual picture. And once again, the black area is hidden and the white area is shown. Okay, so I could always bring that back. And I'm going to show you that right now. I could bring back those hide more areas or show more areas. So right now, what I'm going to do, because I still like this final merged version, I'm just going to duplicate this final merged. And I'm just going to call that, I'm just going to do Command J and to duplicate that. And now what I can do, I could name it, I'm going to call this one makeup. So I'm going to add a little bit of makeup to this picture. So it's not great makeup. I'm just playing around with it just to show you the different things you could do. I really want you to get creative and do some of the things you want to do, but once again, it has to make sense to the picture. It can't just be adding something crazy and it doesn't make sense to the actual magazine cover or what that picture is supposed to do for that magazine cover, quite frankly. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to add I actually don't need to duplicate it, but I'm going to in this regard just to have it there because I'm going to make some adjustment layers, but I'm going to mask out the adjustment layers. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So here I am. I have my adjustment layer. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to look at hue and saturation. Let's just play around. Okay. So I have my hue and saturation layer shows up. It's a new layer, so non-destructive. And once again, it has a mask there. So anything I actually add or change, I could actually mask out or say show some of it or hide some of it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of play around with this. I'm going to change some of the color here. I'm going to colorize it. Click on colorize. And once again, obviously I don't want the whole thing to be purple or anything like that. I'm just going to select a color. I'm going to play around with her lips. Okay, I'm going to try to find a color that I can maybe make it look like she has lipstick on, or a slight blush to that, which I'm also going to play around with, once again, her cheeks and maybe something else too. So I have this color here. Once again, don't look at the overall, look at the lips. Just focus on the lips and say, yeah, that's kind of a color I would like on her lips, and we could always play around with it later, which is the phenomenal thing about masks, about adjustment layers, and it being on its own layer, which is really, really cool. So let's just say that I'm happy with that, and I'm just going to leave it. Great. Now, obviously, the mask is white, meaning it's showing everything. Well, I don't want it to show everything. Actually, I want it to show nothing right now, and I'm going to paint in the parts that I want it to show. So what I'm going to do first, when I'm going to click on my mask on this layer, we see it selected. It has a little borders around it, and I'm going to press Command I. Command I reverses it to the opposite. So if I press Command I again, now it's fully shown. Command I, now it's fully black, which is fully hidden. I assume on a PC it's Control I. So what I could do now with my black area, my black mask selected, I can select the brush tool, and once again we know how the brush tool works. I can make it bigger or smaller using the open and close brackets, and I could obviously make it softer by clicking right or going up here and saying, yeah, I want it to be very soft, and in this case I want it to be very soft. So what I could do now, I'm going to paint white on a mask that is black currently, meaning everything is hidden. So if I paint white, meaning I'm going to show some of that work. If I paint black on black, nothing's going to happen. I'm just hiding more. So I'm going to paint white on black, and let's watch what happens. Remember, I can change my opacity to, if I want to build it up slowly, I can make 10, 20, 30, 40, 50%. If I want to build it up quicker, 80, 90, 100%. So right now I'm at 75%. So let me just slowly bring this in. So as I start to paint, I start to bring in that reddish hue saturation layer I added. And zoom in a little bit to get a little bit more control. So now I'm just painting in on the mask that layer that I made, and it's bringing in all that like I said, hue saturation. And once again, just kind of simple. And now it's not going to be perfect, it's not going to be great. And what if I do one of these accidentally? I go, whoa. Okay, not a problem, because I went over. I'm showing more of that red area, which I don't want. That's all I have to do is just switch this out, or I can press X and it switches it for me. Pressing X will change the foreground and the background. Now I'm painting black on the black mask, which means it's going to hide it for me. Now it's at 75%, so I want it to happen all at once. So I'll type in 100 and I'll just get rid of all of it. There we go. Okay, now at a 100%, I'm going to press X again and bring it back to painting white onto my lips. And there we go. Okay, now once again, I could fix it up a little bit, make it a little bit tighter, make it a little bit more. Maybe it's not looking right. Whatever the case is. Maybe I need to clean it up a little bit, whatever. Now that's what that looks like. Okay, we can really, really fine tune it. Now, if I wanted to go a little bit further, I zoom out a little bit. It's like, wow, that's really bright. It's a little too much, obviously, for this. Because of my subtle tones and my desaturation of the colors I overall did, that looks really, it doesn't really look right. That's okay. I can go to my opacity and bring it down. Now I'm bringing down my opacity little by little. I was like, okay, now that color's starting to make sense a little bit. It doesn't pop as much, but it still feels like it's a part of the image. Okay, so I could bring it down a lot and say, no, I'm going to slowly bring it up to make more sense. Okay, maybe right about there is feeling pretty good too. Okay, I could also play around with blending modes and see if a blending mode makes more sense. So now that multiply made it a little bit darker. That looks really nice too. So now it's becoming a different color by playing around with some of the blending modes too. Actually, the one I really liked, I think, was multiply. Or actually linear burn. That was kind of nice. And once again, maybe feels still a little too much. That's okay. Let's bring down the opacity. There we go. Nice. I turn it on and off to see if I like it or not. Great. Now here's another thing I could do. I could play around with this, and maybe I'm going to bring in a little bit of the cheek, a little bit of the blush there. So I'm going to click on the mask, click on my brush tool. I'm going to increase the size of my brush. But this time I'm going to just put a little splash of it. So I'm going to make sure that my opacity maybe is at like 20%. So I'm just going to do a really quick click, bring it back a little bit, just slowly build it up. Oh, I'm painting black on black. My mistake. So what I need to do is make it white. So I'm showing more of this layer. So I'm gonna little splash there, little splash. Just bringing back some of that reddishness that I want to show. So once again, if I turn it on and off, you can see how it's bringing out some of that red blush in the cheeks. Now here's an extra one I'm just playing around with just to show you what you can do once again with it if you wanted to. I'm going to actually put a little streak in her hair just for fun. And once again, I'm going to build it. I'm going to go full out 100%, soft brush, and let's see what we got here. Okay, a little bit of some kind of fun here. Okay. And once again, if I go too far, I could zoom in and get it really, really close. I could fix up my mistakes if I went too far. And now I have a little extra flair there, something fun. And that's all I did was show more of the mask that right now is hiding all that red that was underneath. And we could play around like that. Now, another one we could do is kind of maybe want to do something with the eyes. We want to color the eyes a little bit. We could do the same thing. So I'm going to make a new adjustment layer. I'm going to add in let's say a color balance. So here's my color balance, and just focus on the eyes. Don't worry about anything else. Just focus on the eyes. And let's say we wanted the eyes to stand out a certain way. We want them to be a little bit more bluish green if you want. Okay, that's it. I'm not focusing on anything else. I don't care because I'm going to mask those parts out. Okay, so there I go. I'm kind of happy with that. The color is going to be on the eyes. Great. And I'm just going to click on the mask. Now, if I wanted to, if I really, really wanted to, I can click on my brush tool. And if I start painting black, now I'll start hiding. Let me hide this too. I'm going to hide all these. Oh, my apologies. Sorry. I'm on the mask. If I click black on the mask, it's going to start hiding on that area. Okay. It's going to hide all those, hide all the green areas and bring back my normal background. Now, obviously this would take a while and not necessary, right? So that's why I go to that mask and I press Command I, and it reverses it automatically for me. Now, instead of me getting rid of all the things I don't want, I just have to add in the few things I do want. So once again, I'm just going to zoom in. I'm going to click on that mask, make sure I'm painting white on the mask, because that white means I'm going to show something. Black means I'm going to hide something. And once again, I'm just going to, I am at 100% of my brush, and I'm just going to bring that in. There we go. Okay. Now, once again, if I go overboard, oh, I painted a little too much, not a problem. Turn it back to black, paint black, and now I'm hiding part of that mask again. And once again, you might look at this, you zoom out, be like, that's a little too intense. Not a problem. Let's play around with it. Let's bring down the opacity. So you know what? I like how much is there. I just don't feel that green is enough. Not a problem. What I can do, I can click back on this layer here, this part of the layer, and it brings back my property. In my properties panel, it brings back all those changes I can make to that adjustment layer. So, you know, I want it much more green. Cool. Those are just the midtones. Maybe I want the highlights to be even more. Bring it up really, really high. Whatever I want it to be. Okay. And you can keep on playing with it and say, you know what, maybe I didn't want it like that at all. Maybe I want it now, it's a little more hazel. I could play around with that. You can play around with it any way you want. And once again, turn it on and off and say, do I like that? Do I not like that? So this is just an idea on how to target certain little areas that you want to touch up with adjustment layers, and either play around with it in a very non-destructive way, where once again, I could just get rid of them, say, you know what, I'm happy with the way it was, or say, you know what, I want a little bit of pop, I want a little bit of excitement, something interesting, and you could do it that way without having to worry about the whole area getting covered. You could just specifically center out, target certain areas that you want to fix, and play around with that. Use many different adjustment layers to do those things, but once again, we play with the mask. The black is hiding something, and the white is showing something. That's how masks work. I hope this helps out.